Wabi Sabi, The Hippie Connection. Read to you by the author, Angel Forrest. Dedicated to nature. Why are there so many songs about rainbows and what's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, but only illusions, and rainbows have nothing to hide. So we've been told, and some choose to believe it. I know they're wrong. Wait and see. Someday we'll find it. The rainbow connection. The lovers, the dreamers, and me. Paul Williams, The Rainbow Connection. Imagine. I had been trying to get to Rainbow for quite a while, and it was cheesy cheese grillin', roller coaster thrillin' to have finally made it to the fabled Rainbow Gathering. I felt fictional. It was mystical, much like Peter Pan when he first landed in Never Never Land. To me, 1997 was the dawning of the age of rainbow, and Oregon's forest roads had taken us super blessed ones home to the place where love reigned, the 25th annual Rainbow Gathering of Living Light. It was already early morning when we parked it in the big open field of dreams, along with hundreds of other vehicles neatly snuggled in snaggletooth rows. Chuck, the brother who had given us the gift of a lift, was the most combustible and instantly busted out into the cool air without anything, mad lad dashing to find the girl of his wet dreams. From the parking lot, I went to the forest roads. The further in I went, the more dust-covered cars and painted school buses banked the road, the more folks I saw loading packs and wagons with supplies. I walked a while until I made it to the main trail. There was a bunch of family there, getting dropping off packs, tarps, and tents. One of them stopped cramming their pack to say, "Welcome home." I moved on, irresistibly drawn into what I had dreamt of for so long. How sweet it was to leave the heavy metal of the road for the soft petal flower power of the woods. Before long, someone else walked by and said, "Welcome home, Brother Bear." The more I walked in with my ratty pack and nappy bedroll, the more I warmly heard, "Welcome home," kindly, "Welcome home," lovingly, "Welcome home." Guided by the occasional cardboard sign sharpied with directions, I rolled deeper into Bonita Terra Incognita, like Charlie entering Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. This is how it must have felt when an ardent believer made it into the afterlife of their choice, in a world of illusions and disconnection. Finally, genuine reflections. I had arrived to where there was no walls or money to hide behind. At last, I had escaped from the injustice system, the pitiless machine, the gruesome grind, and returned to nature, to each other, to love. I was high on mountains, high in the clouds, high as a cherub could be. I slowly entered, feeling ecstatic and elastic, returning to the timeless clan of the cave bear fantastic. The more I treaded lightly on hollow ground, the more my senses halo rippled, rebounded, unbounded, from plastic instincts to basic instincts, all the way to the Jurassic world, to be in sync with the most elevated emanations of creation. I stopped occasionally, puzzled, and bent down and picked up what I thought were dark dreadlocks. I rubbed them into the palm of my hands and looked up at the trees. I soon decided it must be Usnia, aka Old Man's Beard. "Welcome home." "Thanks, it's good to be here." After an hour of bumbling along the path less traveled, I emerged from the evergreen trees and into a mellow meadow, to Pakalololo, and behold, the fabled land of El Dorado, filled with emboldened folks and golden feelings, all in their bodacious bohemian bonhomie. It was hard a bright eye and bushy trail believed that I had made it. Therein I beheld dreadlock Congo Bongo eye, more than I had ever seen. It was everything I had ever wanted, and so much more than I could have ever Saturday morning cartoon conjured. Diggity dink schwank, go tell it on the treetops. Wingsuit superfly, yell it to the gods and goddesses that the legends were the real deal. I'll steal your face. I was there. I had made it. A kid from nowhere who believed in the hippie fairy tales. It was something out of the late 60s acid trip, the trip of all trips, where all the peace sign and love beads ended up This was where the really trippy hippies had retreated to build their castles in the clouds. It was like being at the original Woodstock, but there was no upstages to upstage us, just a ton of musicians playing at a camp nearby. I stopped on the edge of a meadow to take it all in, and I saw many tribes creatively coexisting. It was for this, through the power empowered by Rainbow. I was conceived in the 70s, born in the 80s, and liberated in the 90s to be reborn in the moment. Blah blah bling. I had won the hippie lottery, making it to this gathering. Cha-cha-ching. I hit the gathering of the vibes jackpot, where most folks love life and smoke pot. The brothers and sisters who were here were the still plucky lucky ones. So many other mushy love dreamers would never make it close, would be consumed by the masticating capitalistic machinations until they were all gnawed up, chewy-fooey spat out, and they were brain dead or blew their gummy worm brain mainframes out. Rainbow is the universal joy I want to share with those who still feel the circle of creation recreationally and circulating in all creations. Just imagine what could be fudgeable if it was all fun, fungy fudge. While Rome burned, rainbows volunteer to smash all fear. For a few days, even weeks, we sacrificed the world's contrivances for compassion and equality. While the rat race in the shitty rerun ran around for the saddest, laddest, maddest, baddest, and flattest status, rainbows ran from that bucking sound systems to amethyst rock star the sound system to rotten amok, buck wild, back to the naked forest, for life-affirming reflections like sharing food, communing with trees, and free-spirited dreamers in their Captain Planet elements, earth, wind, water, fire, and heart. Welcome home. Runaway train. Before we highfalutin blast through the pass on that shooting Rainbow Star Bridge that took me everywhere and keeps taking me all over until it's all under and over, I want a free range rover run over this big bird buzzkill roadkill. I want to Thelonious Monk on Fire tell you about being lost at sea in a bluesy medley where the folks who were persecuted, killed, abused had come for refuge, so they can do as much to many more ad nauseam. I want to tell you what a bum trip I was having and how finding the Rainbow Gathering radically altered my jazzy life and how instantly I became a holy heavy bowler believer, receiver, transceiver, signed, sealed, delivered. I want to do more than spin a spun out, raised in a barn, close-knit yarn about my life on the open sesame streets and on the floppy jalopy road. I want to give you that tortillas flats perspective, hip beer hop you to that Jack Kerouac beatbox, hippie jelly belly flip-flop. I too came to present presence to scandalize and tele-evangelize and testify to those with the vision, time and space to space out, to travel, to live a little wee bit, to meet those who did not adhere to the regularly scheduled programs. Overall, I want to extol the virtues of taking trips, sparkly rainbows, of meeting radicals, of living like there ain't nowhere like being aware. Black Hole Sun. Paparazzi flashback to the start of my 16th year in that summer of 1996 when I was bummed out as a kid could be. Brett Favre throwback touchdown to the dog days of that bummer when I had just one flew over the cuckoo's nest escaped the creepy clutches of Las Vegas, yet again in that mean-ass group home, so I could grim reaper creep into an off-scripted Tales from the Crypt. It had taken a sleepless and sheepish 112 weary miles, but I was back. Back after a godforsaken Blazing Saddles day of hitchhiking and a shivering herky-jerky graveyard shift of walking. I was back in Needles, California. I turkey-jerky ambled on in shambles into that Ron Ronco dehydrator of a town, into another blinding afternoon bereft, ready to be spaghettified, and finally ditched the spaghetti western / horror flick that was my so-called life. I could not have been more depressed. Admittedly, I was not being chain gang banged in a dreary dungeon, or peeled like an onion with unsanitized medieval instruments by overzealous henchmen, but emotionally I was. At least most folks who were given the old Brown Rats or Brazen Bulls deluxe package had folks they cared about, or who cared about them. So far, my insensitive tour of life had made me pretty insensitive and careless, because I could not care less about any of it. Without a sister or brother, a father or mother, a friend or lover, why bother? At least I had my big brother, but not really, because he was off on some meteoric, deep impact journey trying to save himself. No doubt on the loose, nomad Maxon, backtracking on his own quixotic mindfuck. He was out there, somewhere, perhaps emaciated, but emancipated. I, myself, just barely escaped from fear and loathing in Las Vegas, but there it followed me, with each hot step, each rusty step. I followed in the followed ruts of my fellow puny terps that came before, hopelessly crumbling onwards, longing to be in that all-encompassing embrace of my death trap. This grueling walk felt far worse than the Baton Death March, because they were far from alone, let alone forgotten. Blue, red, or purple pill, where could I really chill, especially when I felt worthless? It was a grave situation, and a grave was all I cravenly craved. I had to run dry, busted radiator in the desert, could not even cry. Thus, in the needle's dust I trudge, for the first time in months, ready again to die. For reals this time. I had already taken the death-wish leap of faith in my mind, and soon my body would follow. This forgotten desert town was the closest thing to a hometown my short, pathetic, and peripatetic life had known, and as good as any to be flushed into the cosmic toilet. As the tattooed-up boxcar trains cut through this cartoony like traveling graffiti museums, I crept into the windswept terrain towards the Marshmallows residence, which resided on the edges of the deadest of dead-end towns. It was apropos to Hellbound to end it here, because when it got really hot, Needles was a hellhole. It was pretty much a waypoint for travelers journeying into the depths of Dante's Inferno. Needles. Have a look-see, not much to see. Mostly it was a hazy and dusty canvas to be a teenager in the late 1990s. Like many small towns, Needles would not be here if not for the kind of literal lifelines of the railroads, which established it in 1883 and still life-supported many. It was pretty amazing this impractical place existed at all, for it defied the environment, like a Mars colony. If it was not for the sanctified waters of the Colorado River, this town would have been called Mega Death Valley. Instead, it was named after the pointy mountain peaks to the south, across the river in Arizona. Before the insidious, bloodthirsty conquistador spirit cursed this land with its greed, for thousands of sand-hourglass years the Native Americans lived here in relative peace, and they, as a tribe, were called the Mojave, which, not surprisingly, translated to besides river. They were one of the original Colorado Indian tribes, whatever that means. The former Mojave hunters and gatherers now mostly hid in their homes, watching cable, getting fat, playing video games, like everyone else not caring for the oppressive heat. Without the ancient wisdom and simple needs, the folks in these parts had to adapt and be industrial tortoises, who used houses and cars as a protective shell to endure the hell of this endless hot spells. Clearly, I did not really care for that patch of dirt called Needles. Few did. I needed locomotion wave oceans and wild mountain honey. Props to Edward Abbey, that Gila monster of a man who could, with his famous dry wit, wax poetic about the desert. But I would never care for it one bit. It just got too tater-tot hot to Hotel California pot handle. Boy, oh boy, did it get hot. Most folks think they know what hot is, but they do not. Aside from the iconic Route 66 that used to cut through here, and now Interstate 40, its lame claim to fame was extreme heat. Temperatures at the height of summer were typically 120 degrees. One record-breaking time it rained when it was 115 degrees out, and the droplets were instantly vaporized on contact with the ground. For the most part, it has the hottest days of anywhere in the United States, and holds many records for being such a hottie. The bleak surroundings were a good backdrop for my killer depression. Maybe I was teenage angst projecting, but it was obvious I was utterly useless, and worse, unwanted. I was a desert, nothing growing, everything dead. I would be easily forgotten. There would be no milk cartons of my face or news bulletins mentioning my name. Call off the search. No one cared, not even the church, not even a smidgen for this kid. Runaway train. My smoking hot new life already started when I sulked on over to the Marshmallows residence. It was another blinding summer day with the ultraviolet lights at their skin blistering and cancer-causing brightest. I had come to hang my head in shame. But before I did, I needed to leave a message of tenderness for my brother. I figured the Marshmallow Clan could tell him that I adored him. Give him the little note I had written to forever flummox and warp him with guilt. Presumably, he would have endlessly asked himself if there was anything he could have done to save his little bratty brother. After tying up that loose end, I was free to noose myself picturesque from the dirty gray rainbow bridge that arced over the Colorado River connecting California and Arizona. As I approached, I felt the house thumping with classic rock. Creton's Clearwater Revival singing with sensuous moans and infectious groans, Lodi. Things got bad, things got worse. I guess you know the tune. I firmly rapped, but the bass in the speakers knocked harder. I kept knocking on heaven's door. Nothing. I ham-fisted pounded on the door like a pork chop cop. Waited. No answer. Most folks just let themselves in, and it was not like they were expecting me. No one heard me, let alone cared. Once more, with frustrated vigor, I hit it and quit it. Finally, Roger came to the door, canine grinning, his face framed by his long bushy sideburns. A cheap beer in hand, he pushed me in with the other, into the music and life of small-town outlaws. It was like a hand reaching down from the clouds into a sun-baked hell and pulling me up into the air-conditioned heaven. Roger was actually glad to see me, which was bloody rare, because I thought no one cared. No one had ever been glad to see me since I was a baby, unless they were a pederast. My whole life, I'd just been a burden to everyone. He quickly materialized a aluminum can fizzle full of that world's famous elixir to take the edge off. I gladly took it. What brings you round, Lewis? Nothing. Just ran away from another shitty group home. Cool. Welcome, dude. Maybe I just needed a beer to drink and an ear to sink, because at that quirky moment, all the quarks, atoms, and neurons shifted, got gifted and uplifted. It could have well been a tribal ceremony in an ancient forest on a new moon. I drank hoppity hops some and no longer felt like I was teetering edgy on the edge. Instead, I was slingshot spat from a pit of total despair and back into the stars to star again in the typical story of a life of radical curiosity. As I looked around at my brother's old posse, I meekly asked him, "Is my brother around town?" He informed me my brother was far out, somewhere chasing blue whale rainbows, Moby Dickens dicking around. I took it all in, enjoyed the cold beer, looked at most of my brother's friends with affection. It was such a happy happening, no adult supervision / oppression, just us unkept and unkempt ones, reveling in our teenage rebellion. After fretting about it for a while, I confided to Roger, "I don't have a place to crash tonight." Roger said, "No prob, dude. Come stay with us. Brenda's got this new spot with a shitload of room. She won't mind." Lifesaver. Like our forefathers, I soon long forgot what ailed me with some malt liquor ales. Thank you, great spirits. I just blended splendid, and we all became friends as the tipsy-turvy world turned, got dizzy and burned. The rest of the night was the blast. Small town bumpin', music mega blasting all the bad and sad away like rockin' ocean waves. It was not really the 90s, more like the early 70s. Beer spillin', big walk talkin', AC blasting. Tolerant neighbors, couch camping, dog petting, card playing, future scheming, metal bowl puffing. Beer was dear, but we loved to smoke weed. From light to dark we sparkled many stem-ridden bowls. It was a far cry from the dank. It bore no resemblance to anything sticky that stank. Mexican weed was all this town ever knew, and we enjoyed it, not having known anything better. Constantly we kept hard-hitting the smashed and seedy brown and shiny metal bowls. While we set it ablaze to blaze up, the chrome gleamed on the outside, and on the inside fiery black holes sucked it all in, until it was dusted in the wind. We puffed fierce as we crimped our fingers around them for dear life, sometimes burning our fingers on the bowl's event horizon, trying to get it all in as if it might be our last hit ever. Eyes watering, holding it, body convulsing, begging for a hit of fresh air until one was coughing something awful, exhaling a thick sauce of exhaust of medicine pouring, turning red, wheezing, pounding their chests, stomping their feet, then smiling and drooling. What more could a rebellious teenager want? It was like I died and went to a dirty, dirt poor heaven. Just when I thought it was the end of the road for me. The end. The only end, my friend. It was just the beginning of all of my love. I drunk me beer and forgot me fears. I even forgot about my pre-scheduled farewell. This was the life for me, for small-town misfits, stereo constantly rockin' rebel and classic rock for the landlocked. We stayed up pretty late until too drunk to stay awake or keep drinking. I slept cozy on the couch like so many others always did. Mike R. slept in the big couch adjacent to mine. I slept better than I had in ages, no longer feeling alone. Roger slept in Darlene's room with her. Steve and Norman slept in their room, joined by their cousin Nick, and all was well. Smells like teen spirit. I was awoken by the amorous licking of the marshmallow's lovable dog, Lady. "Hey, girl!" I exclaimed as I petted her. Darlene was soon making pancakes for all. Then Norman came out of his room and manned the epic sound system like a NASA mission control engineer, hunching studiously over between the large laminated wood speakers, toying knowingly with the instrument panel. Instantly the house was power cord quaking, while the scrappiest among us scraped up another bowl of resin from the tar pits of pipes. The Marshmallows residence was quite the refuge for the poor and delinquent kids, like me and my brother. By some strange sorcery, the fridge overflowed with plenitude. The dad, who I reverently referred to as Mr. Marshmallow, was often at work, driving those trains along the Southwest, living what I like to imagine a double and triple life in other cities. If Mr. Marshmallow was not working that train, he also liked to go upriver 30 miles to gamble at the Laughlin casinos on the Nevada border. Thus, most of the time, the house was a free-for-all. Better yet, he was a benevolent enough father who remembered what it was like to be a kid in a small town. Or maybe he was just done dealing with a house full of teens. Not to mention his wife had killed herself a few years back, and it probably affected the kids deeply, so he cut him a lot of slack. Whatever the reasons for being so laid back, I loved him. He was an upstanding ape. He did not seem to mind me or anyone eating his food. It was like he really cared about lost kids, looked out for wolf pups with no pack of their own, packing to and fro. After staying another pleasantly addled night in the House of Plenty, we had a skedaddle scooter since Pop was about to pop back into town and we did not want to cramp our style. We would be back to the house to party. Until then, I happily followed Roger to my new home. I did not need much, just a place to lay my head and folks who needed me. I was quite happy walking with my newfound brother. What an all too rare and pleasing feeling, going to a place where I was wanted and accepted. I went forth, reborn. Tumbling Tumbleweeds. Slow mo and zoom in. Panoramic pan into the constant herd of tumbling weeds, which come in many flavors and are so pervasive that they are commonly thought to have always been part of the western landscape, when in fact most of them are recent immigrants from Eurasia among other places, and what has to be one of the greatest hitchhiking stories ever. Tumbleweeds permeate this hardscrabble terrain masterfully, majestically going where few plants stared, like ferocious, intrepid extremophiles. Mostly they languish languidly, no rush to settle down. But once unmoored, tumbleweeds were ever tumbling, not recognizing borders, and thriving in places few dared. Unbounded, they bounded over mountains. Others seagulled, freeballed through the canyons, river rafted, sky sailed, bounced up deserted streets on all over. damn near unstoppable and indestructible. They were the humble, rough and tumble symbol of the desert, spiraling dizzily in no hurry, wind-powered, solar-powered, searching for a dirty crack, spreading hundreds of thousands of seeds carelessly. Sometimes its spindly, barded limbs got stuck on taut wire fences or exploded under car tires, but mostly it cruised merrily along galloping wild horses, slid past sly coyotes, truckered with the freeways, chugged along with the locomotives, leaving a twig here, a branch there, until it was just a small root ball spinning lazily to be completely ground down by the abrasiveness of life on the frontier, and nothing was left but dust bunnies. It was just me and Roger walking the hot, dusty streets like wild dogs, occasionally artful dodging, dodgy, barreling tumbleweeds. We walked hard, our shadows tucked beneath us, hiding the best they could from the beastly heat. As we passed the typical compacted dirt, rock, and cacti-pricked yards, he gave me the pooper scoop about his stepmom, Brenda, who I only knew in passing. He assured me she was a bit out there, but otherwise totally cool. Brenda Ann lived on a forgotten block with very few neighbors. They had moved in a couple weeks ago, and my timing was spot on. Compared to the trailers or apartments I had known growing up, it was huge. Otherwise, it was just an ordinary house, slowly disintegrating into graham cracker dust in a dusty cracker town. Besides Roger to take care of, Brenda had a couple toddlers, a 3 and a 5-year-old. She naturally took me in and was way cool about anything. She was in her late 30s, but looked way overcooked and acted like a sick, starved cougar. Always prowling, trying to poach Roger's friends and old friends, grown-up kids. This woman had partied with hedonistic zeal, and did not plan on ever stopping. Her Amelia Earhart flights of fancy were industrially powered by her many prescription drugs. Brenda was an intrinsic part of our Hells Angels gang of clowns in many ways. A Hunter-esque, Thompson-esque accomplice in our most illicit activities, even inciting some of them. I surmise, like most around here, she started out easy on soda, Pop-Tarts, and Big Macs. Then she took it up a notch with friends, with the hooch and the weed. Then she outdid her peers and went the distance with coke. Then meth pills, until her teeth rotted out and she got some dentures. Then she kept going and going. She was unstoppable. Who knows where I would be without this spun-out and dirtied Lady Liberty, who, thanks largely to schizophrenia, had quite a wild streak. She took me in like one of her own, made me feel at home. Instantly, I had a brother and sister, more importantly an older brother, and a mom. I made the best of it, and it had never been better. The piece de resistance was Brenda's big empty garage in the back. Instantaneously, me and Roger completely took over that old cobweb-laced, dusty dustbin wonderland. On the spot, the mad nail structure on a concrete slab became our Fab Gab Lab. It was just a rectangle in the sun-torched backyard with its own entrance, crowned by a rusty but trusty curated metal roof and walled off by thin wood planks. Overnight, I was at home as could be in the garage, as we primitively dubbed our primitive stomping ground. The crash pad was the launch pad for countless celebrations of youth and rebellion. Naturally, it became the preeminent delinquent spot where the classless kids brought their finest malt liquors to party nonstop, excited about being alive and intoxicated, unsatisfied to the max with the suffocating, empty, and salty surroundings. We were trapped in our own hot dirt truck exhaust snow globe of a town, and we lived it up like there was no scorched tomorrow. With my burgeoning imagination and innate sense of interior design, I made the garage festive and inviting. I loved sprucing up the spot like a fairy godmother, with a comfy couch here or a beanbag there. I often liked to monkey king swing on the rafters. Sometimes chemtrails of flowy fabrics trailed me as I sailed by a big fluffy stuffed bunny or a giant plastic pumpkin, some pink flamingos, and then some glittery tinsel of beer cans. The whole world was a living canvas, and this was the one we could live in. More importantly, party in. Each day, I junk painted it a little bit more with miscellaneous crap. Others contributed, but it was mostly me who pimped out the lizard lounge areas with random shit on the daily, most of it recycled from folks' yards and scored from the dilapidated desert, all making it more festive funhouse funner. There was something about teeny desert towns and southwest outposts, especially Needles, California, which was part of the desert Bermuda Triangle, where cars came to die from exhaustion and heat wave delirium. What a non-place, a dystopia of forgotten islands sinking into the shifting sands of an hourglass. There was barely 5,000 apathetic folks, cluster-fucked into 1,200 families, crammed into 2,000 households, all desert islands stranded. Everyone apparently just moron marooning, giving zero fucks about where they lived, let alone how. It was not all a shit show. Needles had a royal crown jewel, that fresh Colorado River, back before it was sucked dry by overpopulation, mismanagement, weed, and almond farms. The West's most famous life force was ever fluid in my youth, but soon it would be a muddy trickle, then probably a geriatric memory or an ironic meme. On the river's 1,450-mile Grand Canyon carving serpentine journey from Wyoming to Mexico, it sustained 40 million folks and many crawdaddies, never more than a few miles away from anywhere in town, always shimmering majestically, forever playfully inviting us to swim, soak, and raft, the boats waving us over so we could let the sun burn us relentlessly while the wild winds sandblasted us. Aside from that, it was a total wasteland, and where there was little to do but waste time getting wasted into blurry enlightenment. Notably, the pigs were chill as fuck, probably because they used to do the same damn things. Thus, teenage potheads like me and my friends were not much considered. Some hard-ass coppers occasionally detained us, and if they found a cellophane baggie of dirt weed, might make us dump our stash or toss our metal pipes in the bushes, but they never arrested anyone for smoking it. They also turned a blind eye to our bacchanalian parties. They were more concerned with the tweakers and drunk drivers, as they should be. Tweakers could be awesome, but mostly they were cancer of many small locales. They needed help, did not get it, so they self-medicated and were a symptom of a bigger problem, which was this American life. A classic bumper sticker in these parts was, "Tweakers suck." If I had stayed in the juvenile Las Vegas system I had recently escaped from, I would have been industriously lobotomized by lab coat witch doctors practicing black magic on poor folks' mind, sedating us so we can robot function in dysfunctional rat race. Meth might be a bad thing in this big bad ball, but what was worse was how we treated kids. How this world is run by the most ruthless for the pettiest reasons. Maybe it was all lovely logic and homey heart in other countries, but it was all fierce farce and fancy facade here. If someone really truly cares, they will try to understand, not just condemn. Unfortunately, math was perhaps the hardest to not spiral out of control with, and I'm sure if I had the money and sadness, it would have subsumed me, because most of us kids do not have much going for us. But drugs. Drugs, they made us feel love of a mother, of a father we never had. They made us feel acceptance of a family we never knew. If only folks had more access to weed and psychedelics, folks would not need those disreputable drugs. We all wanted a connection to a higher purpose, but this country had made it impossible for most, so we tried to supersede reality by getting higher, and it worked wonderfully until we came down and hit the ground. Then rock bottom, until the bottom falls out. Despite the junkies and the pigs, it was the Indian summer of love for us kangaroo rats, in the barren bummer of a sandpaper town filled with sandcastles and dead-eyed doll thermophiles. The town sucked for young folks, but ice-cooled beer parties with good friends made paradise at night. I began to really dig it, and besides, I was finally free. Somehow I had never been better off. Despite the faded surroundings, for someone with shitty expectations, it was quite the immaculate conception. Blessedly, before the rigor mortis of debilitating routines, disability checks, and draining jobs, we were just kidding around, the unchained ones, having the time of our lives. It would get old when we got old, but for the moment, it was stoned out liberating. We still had the titanium will to question it all, and nothing added up. It all seemed so preposterously unreasonable. Apparently, we too had to make it up, from the bottom up, like everyone else, until bottoms up. Hand in my pocket. Our Sunday's days begun with sleeping in until noon or later in the garage. We might have slept longer, but the dry heat roused us up around the hottest part of the afternoon. Reluctantly we arose, drained our lizards, maybe ate some cereal or peanut butter sandwiches. Then our small squalid squads camped scrimp for weed and beer change, which was kinda like a job. Forced to forage for substances to abuse, we would tortoise step out into the bleach-white day to find the burning bright sun had long ago stripped all the color from everything and left in its place a pale pastel. Then we would roll beyond the pale, like our knuckle-headed hunter and gatherer ancestors on the prowl. We would search high and low to get us from low to high, through petty crimes and misdemeanors. Once we had looted some booty from around the house and neighborhood. We would take our loot and exchange it for loot down at the pawn shop. The teeny joint was jointly run by a couple of retired pigs who seemed to like our random Satan-inspired tapes, cassettes, and swag that we would bring them. Maybe they were building a case on us. Other times we lapped up the largesse of our better-off friends up on the hill. Then it was on. Back to hiding in the shade until night fell, like the other desert creatures. There was little else to do, but smoke what we had and try to conserve energy until when it was not so deathly hot and two live crews assemble so we could all fall apart. After a long day of burning out in this frying pan of a town, this was how the low desert high life came together. Each summer night, the pub hub got tighter, with teenage hang-ups and stolen lighters. We were just unemployed circus rustabouts, and it was just about always the weekend. Each night, the ante escalated with buds and the piss-flavored bubbly at our skylift, late shift, makeshift club. I had a front row seat, and I was always on the searing, soaring edge of it. The garage was the low-budget place for me. For now, these were my kind kin. This was our epoch, where all things childhood were rejected, all things dangerous accepted. We were living heady, ready for the next, flexing the reflexes, reflect, reflect, reflect. Our internal alien antennas were finely tuned to the flower power of hops and its botanical cousin pot. With every hit of weed, Big bang, every beer drunk, a fizzly universe getting wizzy. My, misinformed synapse snapping, clapping, salami tsunami exploding exponentially. We talked about my brother Angel sometimes like he was some Rasta griffin, a Greek semi-demigod, for he had escaped. He would occasionally call the marshmallows to update them. Like most, he did not let this place hold him back. Most of us were stuck reptiles in a desert terrarium, its damn walls invisible, but stronger than steel. Angel had recently turned 18, making him officially an adult. I was still barely 16, and if it were not for him, I would have long ago dispelled myself. When I despaired the most, I thought of him and how one day we would be grown-ups, as if that would make everything make sense. I had not seen Angel in a long while, just heard rumors, always somewhere new. The longer he was away, the more the rumors amplified, death-defied. Last I heard he was in Texas, but who knew? Those that had seen him told that he had changed. Supposedly he had become a radical acid flashback, a tie-dye anachronism. He went from run-of-the-mill troublemaker to a bell-bottom dreadlock hippie, always looking to kick the shit out of a hacky sack with his Bruce Lee style and matching sound effects. Somehow he had time-traveled back to the 60s and early 70s. A few of us were also, slowly, then all at once, making our way back to the garden. But Angel was way ahead of the times and left us all behind. I looked up to him more than ever, idolizing him without restraint. He was a giant, larger than life, making my life and everyone else in this small town feel small-fried, refried, deep-fried. A horse with no name. Every day I woke slowly, looking around, droopy-eyed, like I had just been born, like it was all a trap. Another glorious week of total freedom, buoyed by space parties at the Marshmallows place with its cool air conditioning, chill pool, cool sound system. We turned it all up, the feeling good, the music, the vibe. Cheered on by our tower of power speakers rumbling, grumbling, thundering, Pantera, Marilyn Manson, Janis Joplin, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, CCR, Green Day, Iron Maiden, Guns N' Roses, and our, of course, batshit crazy Ozzy Osbourne. I would often hang out with Norman, who at 17 was exceptionally mature despite his propensity to do impressions of Butthead, from the juvenile delinquent's favorite cartoon show, Beavis and Butthead. He would often put his shirt over his head, raise his hands pharaoh-like, and do an uncanny imitation. "Teepee for me bunghole? You got teepee for my bunghole? Ha ha, bungholio!" Just a routine, puerile entertainment at that point in our lives. Better yet, he was mellow and liked to geek out on the thick sci-fi books. He did not smoke weed and often kept to himself, but at nights he joined us and drank like a champ. Me and Norman bonded over a mutual admiration of technology. He was the designated nerd in the family, the gatekeeper of the computer, and he showed me the way into the internet. Way before it cancerously took over every facet of folks' lives to be practically implanted in their bodies. In a couple of years, the Matrix movies would warn us of living in a virtual reality controlled by robots. A couple decades later, folks would happily submit to their phones and computer games, living the real enough world for our overlords to plunder, to squander every natural resource until we became our phones and did not have to worry about pesky nature. Blessedly for all then, the internet was so innocent and benign. When Norman would dial it up, patiently we waited, listening to the phone transmitting a new emerging life form's dialect, a cacophony of electric buzzes, crackles, and dings, until a few minutes later we were in. It was not the first man-made dimension, but surely the most immersive, via telephone line to the divine, through electric vines. We would slowly link up and sync up with others, interacting by chatting it up with other young techies nearby about boobs and books. He even met a couple cute girls nearby in Bullhead City. It was Internet 1.0, hella beta data, and it was fun for the studious types. Overall, it was still something not many toyed with in these parts. On a regular basis, Norman and his older by a year stepbrother Stephen went for big hikes. There was little else to do, and I went with them sometimes. One time we tried to walk to a town 30 miles away, but we only made it halfway and had to sleep under the underpass below the train tracks, barely getting sleep and freezing. Another time, me and Stephen hiked the Mars-like terrain to the Sacramento Mountains to the west, where the sun set each night. We followed the paths made by rare monsoon rivers into the gullies that lay between modest mountains. We went all over trying to see something we had not seen before, climbing new peaks to peek out at the permanent splat of the flat land. From the tops of the mountains, we looked north at Dead Man's Mountain and saw only more desert. On our random hikes, we found ceramic skulls and old, dusty Bibles. We also knew of a journal hidden in a gulch in a teeny cave with a pencil, and folks wrote in it. Mostly stupid stuff, like the story I made up about killing a Boy Scout. As we descended into the deadpan lowlands, we stopped to smoke some of the best brown around in an aluminum can. Coyotes yiping echoed all over the long dry waterfalls, while jackrabbits sprinted so fast that they left little dust ghosts. We were taking hits, shooting shit. When the bowl was dusted, we dusty dust, doubled back through the arroyos and into the flatness as the sun set behind us and the big moon rosy rose before us. When I was not at the garage or the Marshmallows residence, I often hung out at Jesse's, the ultimate stoner who lived with his mom. At 18, he was a Buddha-like bud buddy that loved nothing more than weed. While most small-town kids snorted coke or smoked crack rocks, weed was benign, and even the perfect addiction that calmed most folks down. He had all kinds of weed porn and was always hotboxing his room, but his mom was totally chill. Or maybe, like many in this town, Jesse's mom was too jacked up on her pills and was too busy with her utterly annoying pugs that just liked to relentlessly and aggressively sniff one another, jumping all over, about to explode with excitement and excrement if petted too much. Some nights me and Jesse would lock the room and make movies on his VHS camera. It was totally dope. They were just low-production sketch comedies with talking Buddha bongs and stinky sock puppets. Jesse also had an impressive impression of Butthead, which came in handy during our shoots. We would light it up, cue up the rebel music like Sublime, who was off the hook that year. For hours on end, we snowballing blasted it, talking screwy, until we improvised the script for a skit in which we tried to animate inanimate objects. We watched the funny fun videos of the few shows we did many times, and they were hilarious. If you're into young wannabe Monty Python dribble like we were. That was when I first fell hard in love with directing, filming, unflinchingly focusing in on a subject. This is what I wanted to do. But I thought I would never have the money to buy cameras decked out as this bulky, monstrous contraption. Like polo and fancy restaurants, it seemed a privilege reserved for the privileged ones, the upper classes, for the spawn of warmongers, those masters of industry who industriously industrial old, tooted, polluted, culture corrupted, nature disrupted. I would also hang out occasionally right across the river at Mike R's place. His dad and mom were still together for the time being. They were true Christian suckers. His dad, Dale, played the violin and mandolin like a mother-loving riot. He tried to show me once, but seeing how I did not have my own instrument, it was hard to get excited about it. Mike R's mom, Lacey, was in the church choir and told me how she used to be a hippie, even busted out a pair of patched-up jeans to prove it. Looking at them, I was amazed how far she had fallen into a comfy and utterly boring life. They even got me to go to church a couple times, and it was not bad, except it was all such bullshit, and it failed them like it did most folks, but still, they doubled down and held on for dear life, and a snowflake's chance in hell of a Chinese afterlife. Mike R. was 2 years older than me and justifiably unsatisfied with everything like most of us. We played PlayStation sometimes, but mostly he hung out with the older crowd. Honestly, I just came over to get high. It was cool smoking pot with him, and he usually had some. Once we got baked and he took me on this dirt bike ride, tearing up the old farm roads, temporarily scarring the earth and permanently scaring the shit out of me. Sometimes me and Roger, on the way to the marshmallows from the garage, we ended up at Jennifer's, who lived with her rapidly deteriorating grandmother in one of the nicer apartment complexes. In the same apartment complex lived Sandy, who liked to hit the bong hard and said it was her God-blessed medicine for her tumor and cancer, until she died. She always had weed and gave 0 fucks, which was the blessed thing about dying. It could strip all the varnish and leave one raw, leaving just their true colors, unafraid to just be. That was a tour of our El Cheapo Easy Bake Depot, where it was easy to get baked and near impossible to escape, except heavily medicated with medicine/drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, and television. Nobody I knew really liked this town, and we talked often about getting out, like castaways stranded on a teeny sinking desert island. Instead, we turned to stone and stoners, ashes and ghosts made out of smoke, evaporated into thin air. Fuck it. It was ours, and we owned it more than any small town down a Trump. It belonged to us more than all the so-called adults, all a bunch of phony balonies. If only we could pawn this town, this world for a better life. Instead, it pawned most of us. Check, 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 bounce, or checkmate, mate. We off-road roam, taking the shortest non-linear routes through a wasteland, trying to get to the moon base where some like to freebase. We were the monkeys cutting and hopping fences, climbing billboards, jumping off bridges into ever-refreshing rivers. Us young orchid kids were still free, high moon, highfalutin commuting, high mountain ram computing, under freeways, over hills, through canyons. We walked the wreckage of the civilizations that came before. Most of them went bust in a gust as the rust turned to dust. Most of the trash were the corpses of metal cars, thin, rusted tin cans, the detritus of animals that came before, all of it strewn like red Mars seashells, being steadily gnawed by the fierce sun every day until gone. Mostly I enjoyed sinking deep to the bottom of a comfy chair in our lair. I started growing my hair, feeling freer than ever. We would hit the bong and then hit rock bottom, to rock out with a stream of rock anthems constantly pumped out by the river, our local radio rock station. While others worked on getting more enmeshed, I was working on my first bell bottoms, head nodding affirmatively to the chants of freedom on the speakers. After a lifetime of programming, no more television, just us kids planning our next clandestine destination with unbridled imaginations. Shine on, you crazy diamond. After a year away, Wade came back in black from Oregon. As he got off the Grey Dog bus, he stood, a black silhouette, backlit by another blindingly bright black Sabbath, penciled in by Charlie Crumb. White as could be, his attire stood in stark contrast, always geared up in black tight jeans, black death metal shirts. As Bro ambulated to and fro, his long animated limbs dangled flimsy, doodle noodle arms rose at his sides as he waded through the salty cracker surroundings. Serendipitously, Wade languidly lumbered over to the garage where me, Roger, and Darlene were plotting our next felonious escapade. He told some jokes as he packed a slick hand-carved wooden Sherlock pipe. As usual, we all laughed and made crude and rude observations on the debris encapsulated in the small pill of the town. After the bowl was dusted, he told us offhandedly about some mushrooms he got. We could have not been more hyped. He might as well have been Newton, saying he could crack the secret to the philosopher's stone and could turn any tin into gold. Behold, we were the heavy meddling and cheap metal that mushrooms could turn into gold. No beer, speed, or weed could alchemize a being like psychedelics. Wade said there was enough for most, and we were mad pumped to hear about it. It was doubtful that mushrooms ever made it to this place at the edge of memories. This could be groundbreaking for the history of this place. Someone informed the Historical Society. Things would never be the same here. We watched closely, holding our breaths as his long fingers unzipped his black fanny pack. Then he delicately, like a jeweler with diamonds, unfurled a flower of cellophane containing cubensis and raised it next to his grinning face. They were burnt golden in color, hundreds of squiggly and melted miniature arrows. They looked like any old mushrooms, but to us they were pulsating and glowing with potential. Wade practically had a gold record above his head, like an old-school saint, as he beatifically held this life-altering being, which was its own thing, not at all a plant, somewhat an animal. Wade had become our archangel of psychedelics, having taken a Grey Dog bus from Nirvana with the food of the gods to share with all. Wade might have well returned from another universe bearing such a gift, like a wise man. He called them Liberty Caps and informed us they grew all over Oregon. It was hard to imagine a place with free life-saving medicines on the ground for free. This was good old boy Wade in his prime, before he crashed and spiraled out in a blur of speed, like so many of us did in these teeny outposts on Desolation Row. That was how I like to remember him, tipsy, Jim Beam beaming. As the night fell and the moon rose, he handed them out freely to Jessie, Roger, and Darlene. Although he barely knew me, he spared me some. That night, all that came before became so teensy-weensy. It felt like a full moon looming and illuminating, but there was only a sliver of the moon in the sky. We were all so psychedelic psyched. We had heard so many rumors about shrooms, and there we were, out of nowhere, eating some filthy, slimy, old-timey goodness. Started like most nights, just sitting there, passing a bowl, goofballing, anticipating a delicious madness. Jesse was telling us about the last time him and Mike R took some mushies. How the weed magazine he was holding started talking to him, and they talked for a long time. As he told us, I looked at the weed pages ripped from High Time magazines that covered the wooden plank walls and wondered if they would talk to us. I sure hoped so. It was not long before our minds started to sparkle and tingle as it came on. As my mind expanded from a walnut to a walnut tree, I put on one of our favorite tapes, an oldie but goldie, the best of the Rolling Stones. It started upbeat and frantic with Mother's Little Helper, and soon got darker, moodier, with the songs about the devil and another about wanting to paint doors black. Then, in the throes of the world-spun wonder, I followed that with some classic Eric Clapton before the baby dropped. After midnight got us amped as the magic kicked in the doors of perception, and we kicked it harder than ever. Needless to say, it was a super glue bonding experience. Technically, the mushrooms were poisoning our young, impressionables, and still forming brains. Technicalities aside, it was a psychedelic therapy of the most high order. Surely, it was one of the best ways to life hack and mind hack, unpack it all and repack the beta data into better gardens and ways of processing information, stimulations, simulations. Seems like all one had to do was get some shrooms, get in a cozy setting for resetting, then rewire the hardwire, cognitively reassign the grand design, macrame the macabre mental electricity for the positive and the negative until it made everything impossible possible. We were bodacious babes in Toyland, toying with superpowers, with little choice but to find our voice, or let others speak for us. That full bloom everywhere night, I heard my inner voice, and it spoke on many levels of unlimited freedom. It must have also been high on mushrooms. It was not long before no walls could contain us. We confetti exploded out into the world laughing. We naturally strolled over next door, where we impishly as ever started a toy with the rehab center next door, which epitomized burnout bummers. It was called the Gopi House, and it was lame. We had our own Gopi thing, and it involved mushrooms, beer, and weed, and it totally ruled. We were often wickedly trying to get them over on our side, the dark rock and roll side, to take a ride on our slippery slide and slide. We undoubtedly reminded them of their younger, demon-possessed versions of themselves, before it all got dope-puking sick and twisted to the point of no return, until they needed some doofus elf to read them bedtime stories about a virtuously dull life and perfect alpha life for pious sheep. They were quite lucky to have us right next to them, divided only by a 4-foot cinder block fence. Nightly they got a full show of temptation, young women, hard liquor, soft surf, medicines, hard rock and roll, and eventually some hardy hard medicines. This night would be no exception. Surely it was reassuring to the stouter ones that had fond memories of their rowdy teenage years, but mostly they were always complaining about us being young and fiercely free. Once we even managed to bring one of them on over. We got him drunk, heard what he thunk. He probably violated his parole agreement, but it was no doubt worth it to relive a life worth living. Some were not made for halfway houses. They were all or nothing. Most were probably there because they had to be. It was that or jail. The best of them are all in, balls to the wall and all out untamable, destined to burn or smash out like a shooting star or a car crash. That night, more than most, we were out in the yard, pouncing like mosh pit stomping goblins, again putting the poor lambs to the test. We went full retard with our shameless, shaggy shenanigans, feeling more unbridled than ever, outfoxing the orthodox plastic box full of Clorox. For goodness sake, we tried to lure them over with sweet temptations. As usual, it was fun as fuck. How could we not? Josh, the head recovering cockroach, begged us to stop, and we became more feverishly delirious, more hilariously nefarious. Josh pleaded, reminding us how they're all struggling addicts, and we did not make it any easier. To us budding assholes, it was all so fun. Fortunately for us, we could not understand addiction, especially on such nights. Furthermore, we did not want to. We were too young to have fucked up our lives. Fuck them if they could not handle it, could not hold a candle to it, because we could, and we did. We were just unsupervised kids who did what we did. As the night lava lamp camped, the Gopi tribe retreated inside, turned off the lights frustrated, and tried to ignore our obnoxious, attentive, whoring asses. We were wide awake looking to heavy metal muddle puddle. We went back inside the house to watch the ceiling drip, dribble, and drop on the television as the static caved in and transmitted secret communiques from other lofty dimensions. We kept upping the up-all-night ante with our uproarious ruckus and antics. Eventually the cops showed up out of nowhere, knocking on the door wearily. We had been sold out by the burnt-out Agape tribe who liked to sleep in peace. Fuckers. We shut off the television and hid. Wade, at 19, was the oldest and most experienced in the delicate and trippy matters, so he went and opened the door. He smiled fiendishly and asked, innocently as could be, "What's the problem?" While we grubby gaggled and sneaky snickered in the dark behind him. The pair of uniforms informed him about the complaint from the rejects next door and asked if they could come in. Wade showed them in like a butler for the super rich, convivially confiding about how the neighbors are always complaining about nothing. It was pitch dark black as the cops looked around with their big beaming mag lights that could double as billy clubs. I squirmed deliriously next to Darlene. We wiggled and giggled as flashes of light alighted briefly on our grins, while Jessie, justifiably paranoid as fuck, pretended to sleep. The cops looked around the low-budget conditions, our blown-out pupils, and did not seem to care. They quickly left, telling us to keep it down and go to bed soon. After the cops drove away, we headed back into the garage, defiant, whooping and hollering. We see Josh on the porch snooping. We glare-bear stared at Josh, who scurried back into his roach motel to pray. But no fictional gods could stop us. We put Iron Butterfly's Immortal in the Garden of Eden and turned it all the way up so the whole damn town could hear it. We kept Circus Maximus stripping like we had done before. Some saw more fabulous mirages, fleeting, beguiling, blurring images, and those of us who could not see it, we felt it, the roly-poly, holy fractal fire, the infinite glow of a brilliant life, the crystal gilded sky radiating love onto the earth in warm, luminous waves. This was lucid dreaming at its shiniest and finest. A couple hours later or whatever, the sun began spiraling upwards on the horizon, wrapping around our mountain Olympus state of minds, which were pleasantly surrounded by subtle yet palpable vibrations of light. The light calls us on, and in our dark clothes, like bats, we blast out of our cave and into the dawn, jibber-jabbering on the break of dawn, light infusing our beings, saturating every cell, until we are just as bright as our surroundings. We swept out into the mind-sweet town, while a low-rider sun rolls along with us, highlighting the picturesque as fuck golden hour. I had never seen the world so vividly. Perhaps no one ever had. When did all the colors come alive, breathe, pulse? If only they taught this in school, world peace would ensue. I was on a magic carpet, given a lofty perspective. I've floated on puffy cloud couches forever, staring at the world below like a television show, each person playing mostly the same part in the same ancient soap operas, then popping like soap bubbles in a bubble bath. Cue the audience applauding at the bad actors playing out a farty farce. Wade suggested we go climb a hill. Next thing I knew, we were climbing up the old cemetery, the one at the top of the hill, down the block overlooking the church. Jessie started yelling, "Bring out your dead!" I followed, "Bring out your dead!" Then we were all laughing, talking in snotty British accents. We contemplated morality for a brief moment, while we stood on some long dead ape boring. We quickly left to find a livelier joint to entertain us. We were then outstandingly running down a dirt hill, arms outstretched. I let gravity carry me away until I was flying, hand gliding, lifted from the earth, uplifted in spirit. It was around this time I discovered I was a natural-born tripper. Bring out your deadheads. I was ready for the acid test and the rest. What the fuck? Was everyone in Oregon eating these all the time? If not, maybe they should be. What a soul-shining feeling. I felt as old as the universe, as bright as the sun, larger than life. We walked down the middle of the streets like we always had, but it was all so new now. With newfound purpose, I walked with my sisters and brothers, feeling the ever-clever giving living lover colors. Talk about communion. They should be handing out mushrooms as the body of Christ at the archaic pagan zombie rituals. For now, too, I was a god. I somehow effortlessly embodied the universe and was at one with all things, superficial and exalted. Although it was a crusty and burnt-out toast town, It was all so brilliant. Surround sound, extra wide, high def screen, directed in all directions of the sun where I kept dissolving like a jello frisbee spun across the multiverse. I was reborn and born again with a condor slash space shuttle wings and monarch butterfly slash eagle vision. Eventually, we found our way back to Brenda's kitchen and we were hungry. Some pancakes would be nice, but we only had cake mix. Jesse, Mike R., Wade, and I were cracking up laughing as we poured cake batter into a hot, oily frying pan. We could not contain ourselves so hard. Although our ribs ached, we kept on wildcrafting, razzle-dazzle riff rafting. Roger and Darlene were in the garage, having spent the morning in the folds of each other, wrapped in an angelic quilted wings of an old tattered tapestry. Then, that all-expansive awareness was rapidly receding. Everyone went home, leaving just me and Roger sleeping the all-nighter off, processing the copious amount of energy and awestruck information that had been downloaded from the Most High. All along the watchtower. After that whole dang banged up bang bang shebang, I started to let my hippie pirate freak flag fly free, and everyone was hip to me, or I was oblivious to what be. Roger was more of a stoned out rocker than full-blown hippie, but he had more holding him down on this planet, whereas I had nothing but my hippie brother, so it was easier for me to take the transition into outer space. Overall, we were only as good as our surroundings, and even the strongest and smartest among us would succumb to the golem glum and the dumb free dumb. What was the real significance of it all? Perhaps that I could shape my own narrative, that nothing is fixed in this broke-down palace of a computer simulation, that it was all encouragingly limitless. I did not know the machine elves of self, and did not know if I ever would, or really, if I even had a self. It seemed things were always changing, that it would never slow down. All I really had going for me was the sweet curiosity that would be steadily trashed by the harsh boundaries of folks' understanding of self, one thought at a time. Meanwhile, it was great having Wade back and getting to know him. I quickly learned that Wade liked to party harder than most of us, and speed helped him do that. He was such a redneck clown, always joshing everyone, but he was also a tweaker, the innocent kind, because it was still more sport than survival. The common unspoken wisdom in our group was that we were invincible, and there was not much harm with dabbling with this shit. Thus everyone was doing it in no time, thanks in part to Wade. Playing with St. Elmo's fire was pretty cool at first, all laid back and down to earth, until it was not, and blew up the spot. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. Out of the red, white, and blue, my rainbowed out brother crouched crash landed from his spiritual retreat, looking as stoned out as a hippie could be, talking like he had been drinking tea and Jedi training with Yoda. He looked totally audacious. From his dirty, calloused feet to his natty dreads, he was positively outrageous. Double decked out in his handmade retrofitted rainbow booster rocket pants, in which he had hand-stitched sandwiched a pair of rainbow beams, which raced up at the speed of light up the seams like a long stretch of magical open road. It had been a while since I last saw him, and never like this, in full acid head zealot mode. This was a radical transformation. He looked so primitive, his gnarly dreadlocks even contained a big-ass chunk of hemp-wrapped amethyst, like a creature from Jim Henson's Dark Crystal. New, too, at least to me, was a biblical beard, whereas I did not even have peach fuzz on my face. It lent him much esteem next to everyone else. More importantly, he had done and seen some shit, been in the visionary trenches. Easily, he had experienced more than most in this town ever would. There was an authoritative heft behind his primitive and mystical gibberish. Angel had returned from his dervish skirmish with mighty desert dust storms to tell us of the surface story no one ever could conjure in these parts, full of hippie hip, mothership, shipwreck, treasure scavenging, and Bo Jackson raiders of the Lost Ark playa savaging. He was our reefer stinking brother, and likewise he referred to everyone as brother or sister. Calling other brothers and sisters put them on the same level as you, made one feel like we were all in it together, and that was an elevated way to be because we were. We had grown up in a capitalistic, therefore individualistic vulture culture, but we knew the way back to feeling ourselves was to get together. That simple shift in vocabulary was evolutionary in most parts, where most do not feel like a part of anything and kept falling apart because of it. On his first day back, as we walked through the golf course to the river, I asked my brother, "How do I get dreads?" Thus he spoke of dreads like Cahill Gibran and the prophet. A crescent of stoner apostles trailed behind him, hanging on his every word. He then stopped, stooped down, and picked up a mess of earth. He motioned for me. When I came forth, he promptly put the smelly hummus and pokey sticks in my hair and proceeded unexpectedly to mix it up violently until it started to dangle-tangle. After a couple more handfuls of the crud in my hair was thoroughly chunky funky monkey, he finally stopped to declare, "That's how it's done." Then he doubled over laughing at my new hairdo. My brother told us naked lunch tales of his recent trip to Burning Man, and also celestial ones about faraway places full of magical hobos, whilst Bob Marley jammed in the background. Pot smoke gave it all a natural mystic aura. We ate it up, all the faithful, fanciful stories of bumbling bums, shaky snaky trains, being stuck hitchhiking, eating a potato pipe to hide the evidence as the cops rolled up, mushrooms in motels, all of it not surprisingly culminating with finding Jesus in a teeny Texas library. Jesus was everywhere in this country, like a leprechaun with his pot of gold, hiding all over, jumping out of trash cans and bushes like a spunky junkie, offering the impossible, everlasting life in the coolest of cities with God himself. Watch out! Jesus will get you hooked on salvation. He will save you from his dad, which was him. He died with everyone else, but also for them, or something really sadistic and fucked up when one really thought about it. My long-lost brother found not the usual old-school mystical Jesus. Instead, it was the new and improved Series T800 Model 101. It was one of the countless modern superhero Jesus clones. Some estimated by the year 2025 there will be 55,000 denominations of Christianity. Pick your flavor of diluted fanfic and subservience to arbitrary worship. It has long been very hip to fanatically proclaim that you are the reincarnation of Jesus, or that he spaketh to you. As Kurt Anderson sharply documented in his book Fantasyland how America went haywire, this country was always hotbed for stupid ideas and crockpot religions. It was even fashionable to insist one was channeling the high alien being from another dimension, who were all too conveniently ready to dish out all the answers to our mundane dramas in a fatherly or motherly, easy-to-understand way. As if folks had not figured this shit out long ago, as if it was not obvious to the ardent observer. But alas, reality could not compete with corrupt fanatics and easy recipes for cheating death. So it was the norm that my brother was primed for some heavenly confabulation. The version he discovered among the rattlesnakes and tumbleweeds involved a secretive order of followers who thought the world would be ending soon, and a bunch of other cockamamie stuff, akin to Heaven's Gate, one of the countless Jesus cults. Best of all, it came in the wholesome guise of an old lady, who was no doubt the reincarnation of Jesus, and she had quite a message for any dummy savvy enough to listen. Fuck a duck, he had found his book. At least he did not have to go to jail to find it. He gotten his message from God and at least a dubious representative, and it sounded too good to be true, but who did not want an uppercase Holy Father when they had been abandoned by their lowercase nutcase father? Those that could not handle the truth were bound to mishandle the biggest lies. Anyone could see it. Me and him were just fucked up homeless kids with shitty parents. We were not God's chosen ones like some. No one was, so we had to pretend we were. As absurd as his newfound dogma was, that was what my brother needed. He was an unwanted, unforsaken young man desperately searching for a virgin mother and a heavenly father, someone to soothe his desires to belong and have someone older to be a radiant example he could model his life after. Undoubtedly, the psychedelics exacerbated his delusions and made him seek out the unorthodox in the orthodox box. It surely was not any more ridiculous than all the other untruthful stories uncomplicated men prom dressed up, made up from toilet paper to feel like there was a reason for for all the suffering and confusion. He was a simple man on a mission to find the monastery/loony bin that followed her ways, and be a monk/groupie. This was just a pit stop in the pits. His plan was crazy enough to work. He was so hip and casual about his delusions that his faith in it gave me faith. Otherwise, no one knew what the fuck he was going on about. Might as well have been talking about a tribe of gnomes that lived among the fairies. Soon as he had come, he was gone, and on a desert plastic quest, chasing myths. Most lucky kids his age were going to college, but he had gone off the deep end. Maybe he should have never left. He was just going down an imaginary rabbit hole, searching desperately for a simple understanding, for a love supreme, because no one had showed us, because what would we be in a world without it, because kids needed it, and adults even more so. The idea was so damn appallingly appealing that I let some of it rain down on me. I even started going to church to search for myself, until finally I baptized myself in the polluted Colorado River, surrendering the best parts of myself, my ability to critically think. I was a fool, but that was often the price we pay to belong, to feel loved. I gave it all up to a higher power, a redeemer, thinking desperately, if only the extra virgin mother could have been my olive oil. The church was so psychologically appealing to the poor and lonely, but so were drugs and deviant friends, who at least were real. After a month of church fronting, I stopped wanting and pretending there was a God. Its soulless propaganda was just too far-fetched for me to stomach, even at that age. It was odiously obvious that the church and its tens of thousands of nutty denominations were an industrially polluted fiction, the real decoy, while my friends were the real McCoy. I chose genuine tribe, my brother chose pie in the sky, and still everyone got high. A rambunctious godless fellowship was the right choice for me. Thank godless goodness for such friends who were supercharged with sinful May Day mayhem, ready to burn this town down. If we could not bring heaven down on earth, we would raise hell. With my brother chasing some holy grail, riding rails, following crumbly word crumb trails, I left chasing oil-slick gutter punk rainbows down the drain. I would get glimpses of light, mirages in the sky, but they were fleeting, sparks of a lighter when lighting a bowl. Insane in the brain! On the simmering nights after my brother left, I often dreamt of him, of fallen angels, of us. I wondered all the time where that badass was. I had visions of him in the desert, Bob Marley nearby, bumping Dopey Conqueror from the 80s Mega Blaster boombox. He might as well been dressed like MC Hammer Bedouin, Michael Jordan, sneaky sneaker break dancing, sugar gliding through the streets, flying squirrels sliding through the trees, Samurai Ginsu slicing and dicing demons with his rapid-fire ninja stars, Scooby-Doo, whoop whoop, where are you? Where was that Atlas Seeker? Perhaps he was the tripper sidestepping the tweakers, getting the deeper message on the beeper from the classified document leaker that kept on leaking articles of faith, real faith in each other and agents of change and sisters and brothers. It had been a few weeks after my oh yeah gala opening of psychedelics, when a bunch of us decided to do some Jimson weed that grew all over. My brother, Roger, Darlene, and Mike R. had done it before, and Roger felt like doing it again. Datura starum nuium, better known in these parts as Jimson weed, is an indigenous plant with a frilly lily white flower that hung pendulously, and it is found in many yards and easily procured all over the Southwest. Like most sentient beings, it was not fond of other creatures eating its precious seeds/embryos/progeny, so it became dangerous. Each pod contained hundreds of teeny seeds. It did not take more than 50 seeds to lose your mind, perhaps permanently. Also, they could kill you. But we were all a bunch of fearless psychonaut Gilligans, ready to Oculus Rift on, lift off, and steal your face off. This was how children of the moment were born, reborn, and went retarded, and even sometimes died. Not only was it a hooligan hallucinogen, it was deliriant. They are called deliriant because they are akin to having delirious fevers. Perhaps you fancy spicy up your life with some self-induced delirium. Well, this is the hot stuff for you. If you enjoy being frightened and confused, unable to control your body or mind, then this is the medicine for you. Jimson weed, aka Hell's Bells, Devil's Trumpet, Devil's Weed, Local Weed, Prickly Bear, Devil's Cucumber, Angel's Trumpet. Come get some. Like the ancient inhabitants of Southern California, we were going to ingest the dark, teeny seas to commune with the divine and have vision. Across the Americas, indigenous communities have used this as a sacred plant. It is also used in Haiti by voodoo priests as a main ingredient to literally turn folks into zombies. It was just another nothing night at the Marshmallows with nothing to do but trip balls. When the tea was cool enough, me, Roger, Stephen, Norman, and Darlene unceremoniously sipped some of the simple concoction. Again, the house was ours as the boss boozed out at the Laughlin casinos, the brightest thing for a 50-mile radius. Those riverside casinos were pretty much a big bug zapper, attracting all the bugged out and buggy whiter older folks to zone out on their ironic carnival of lights inside the glum casinos, complimentarily boozing it up, to loosen it up, to lose it. Tripping on ginseng weed was not remotely what I expected, but little did I know, especially without Wikipedia. Bluntly put, it was simply fucked. All my thoughts, my mind, fucked. Fucked like a poopy cubist Picasso painting. It all just gummy worm gup, gum gup, hum drum drummed up, sound dumb ground, numbed all go around. Fucking she. If this shit worked beneficially at all, it did in mysterious and heady ways, deep in the subconscious, on some primitive rural neural networks at the heart of the reptilian complex. Instead of becoming beings of legit light, we were all became piddly-puddly, with goo-goo for brains. We were out of our wits, talking to the walls like total nitwits. Danto Inferno descending into paradise lost, going down as it all became a precipitous, slippery brr, while suggestive patterns trapped in a diarrhea quagmire of beguiling chimeras of self. Whenever a tangible thought popped up, it was manhandle mangled. Oh, fuck, all this shit is impermanent. It was such an intense, mind-bending, and frightening experience for me, a teen like most with a still developing brain. I often found myself in a fruity hula-loopy, terrified, wondering if I was ever coming back before I was again violently whiplash, shack super slammed drunk, and the space spunk. By the next day, we were back in blind as moles. My friends failed to inform me that it made you lose not just your mind, but more importantly, made one temporarily blind. I was up first and scared shitless, for I had no idea if I was permanently blind. I surely hoped not. When Roger finally awoke, he said casually I would probably get my sight back in a day or two. Probably? I double big gulped in terror. After a day, it had not improved much, and I started to wonder desperately what if Roger was wrong. I stewed forlornly, thinking so much for being an artist. I soon was forced to come to terms with the grim reality, and would make the most of the light barely seeping in, seeing things as if through a white plastic bag. Ever thankfully, after a couple nights, my sights were far out again. I saw even better than before. It was like reverse vision quest, a vision fast, making me lean as I leaned more heavily on my other senses. I kept being initiated into the mystical and gaining an invaluable tripper's perspective on reality, which kept kaleidoscoping blossoming. It was an eye-opening experience to get to see such extreme angles and dimensions. Unfortunately, gypsum weed was not my cup of tea. Some went to Paris, others went to the Virgin Islands, but the real trip of a lifetime was within. It was not always going to be a fun party with these power tools and fools. It was a mystical school for mythical thinkers. To be sure, it would be arduous work. On such outings out of my mind, I would go blind, only to learn that we're all born blind to reality. I would start with my friends, then be alone, going off the edge and trying to somehow make it back with a shred of an intelligible message, only to find they heard it all before. One cannot simply tell folks about going to other planets and dimensions. One had to take 'em there, kicking and screaming. Go, 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 go for it, and go-karts and shopping carts. I am with the Good Trip Bureau, and since King Kesey and Timothy Leary are playing dead with Jerry and Owsley, let me humbly encourage those with the courage to be incorrigible, to leave now, take only what they think will last. If I may propagate propaganda for love, take a real little trip. Let me proselytize rhapsodically about how a low rider rides a little higher. What else is the point of all this madness but feeling all you can, exploring the depths of self, searching for the universal in a world where everyone takes it all too personal? Be a stowaway on a subatomic cruise liner. Enjoy the cosmic comic jester tell another no-brainer one-liner. Be skied, then deep jive, skydive, until rock-bottom rocket uppercuts greatest hits one. Let it kidnap until one finds a place where one feels at home in, where one can make peace with all one's demons, who are just inner child, lost in the wild. Find it and remind it, bring it back with you, so it may share in the constant wonder and love that is everything. Matrix glitch. It was the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Jackpot, slot machine, elves, cha-cha-ching. Spiritual riches for all. Native sun sign on my mind and moon sign in the art. Jupiter and Saturn in the windows of my soul, and the big old and bold black hole in the center of the universe was my heart. What a thrill 'twas to thrive at the start of being a supernova blown open alive. I was not who I was a shattering smattering ago. Verily, I had not loony been where my brother had recycling been. But I too had Jack and Magic Bean been places, realer places, outer spaces, inner spaces, all of them David Bowie and Jim Henson labyrinths. Know your enemy. Once I got my vision back, I started to work on a drawing of Bob Marley on a Windows 95 computer, which was state-of-the-art back then. It was a primitive machine, but it was light years ahead of the Apple II, on which I learned to use in elementary school, where one had to type strings of code into it to make a predetermined picture, the same as all the others. On the Marshmallow's fancy Windows computer, I spray painted an outline, and then zoomed in and pixel by pixel carved out Marley's image. After a couple weeks, I had a pretty good picture of him. I did not know much about him, except he smoked weed, he was black, and he had cool dreads. His reggae music was exotic in the land of hard rock, oldies, and country music, but he fit right in. One love. Hot damn! It would unquestionably be another hot day as summer got more insufferable. So hot, one could cook eggs and bacon on the pavement. On the daily, the land, sidewalks, and asphalt sizzled and turned into rippling mirrors. That was probably why everyone was brain dead. The sun had refried their beans. On such days, I would turn the world upside down, dive into the lazuli sky, and live like a whale shark, swimming into the resplendent night full of bioluminescent stars. In the middle of another tsunami heat wave, Danny and Macy stumbled in out of somewhere to nowhere like tumbleweeds. They lived across the river in Bullhead City and were both 22 years old, had a car, and liked to party down. Many folks would get stranded here, get stuck in the shifty quicksand if they did not move quickly. They came to the wrong fucking place for the right fucking folks. Let the record show Danny was the shitsnitz. He was a wisecracking crackerjack, always sly-smacking, lip-slapping proper, the big mackin' double whopper dropper. Macy was more reserved and soft, but also down for some shenanigans. Together they were perfect, tenderly complimenting the best in each other. They were new to the era, to small towns living across the rivers. Somehow we were the most happening scene around, so they often drove 20 miles to hang out, drive us around, and sleep on couches. Like all fun and poor folks, they had had some trouble with the law and speed in San Bernardino, so had come to lay low with the lowlives living the high life. Macy had family in the area who could harbor them. Macy was a substitute elementary teacher during the school year. Danny was in between jobs, but he'd most recently been a bartender. We loved them and were honored that they would hang out with us. Most of us still living with our parents and under 18. It was at this exact time that cocaine became vogue, and shooting stars sprinkled onto the scene like Tinker Bell's fairy dust. For better and worse, it made everything more intense and unhinged. We would often all pile into Danny's car like action heroes to go raging at a hidden river romping grounds where the old vandals from the days of yore screamed lustfully into the night like Roman candles bursting with scandal. Like the mad ones that came before, we built huge fires, made tons of noise, got drunk, high, stoned, and freer. It was non-stop laughing with Danny's screw-it comic genius. Danny did not belong here. He just burned so bright and made us shine brighter with his Jim Carrey-ass antics. He should have been starring in his own cheeseball sitcom. Instead, he starred night after night in the firmament, among the fallen angels, a fallen star we all wished to be around on the daily. Sometimes we would chicken scratch up some coin, then all drive to Laughlin Strip of gaudy and ostentatious casinos to watch movies, for they were the closest theaters around. Then we would smoke weed, hotboxing in the car, while some others snorted some coke in the bathroom. For a moment there we got away from that town that was vinegar and baking soda jerking our fizzle-frazzled brains. On one of these excursions, they got stopped by the pigs. During the search, the cops found Darlene's weed in the car. Danny, the adult, took the rap for her, because he was a fucking superhero. It was the shabbiest of ideas, but his intentions were unanimously magnanimous. After that, we learned that the road to hell was paved with good intentions and petty police officers. That was the beginning of the end. The full extent of the corrupt law for having a good time came down on him like an anvil gavel, crushing the boulder of a man into gravel. He violated his parole. That naturally led to all kinds of unkind fines. He ended up back in jail, but for a couple months there, he was our speedway boogie super freak, and he broadened our horizons with his heart and generosity. I imagine these days, years later, he's a comedian working some grimy circuit of high school teachers, making everyone laugh and learn in equal measures. In Bloom. I woke early, unable to sleep anymore, because it was too cold without a jacket and only a t-shirt. I just had to get my corny, syrupy blood moving. There was a thick fog that made it hard to see beyond just a few yards. I soon ducked into the gas station for warmth. I used the bathroom and lingered on at the hot hand dryer for a few minutes. I bought the cheapest things there, Little Debbie snacks, which would become a staple of my unstable diet for years to come. Then I double-checked the map by the register as a couple employees glared at me. The closer I got, the more confusing it got. What awaited me seemed to be a scattered spaghetti platter full of rectangle angle roads, a slew of rigid octopi ready to entangle me in concrete tentacles. I closed the map with a big boxy scribble of mazes, and I got ready to hard scrabble. I had to mosey on without a doubt. I forged ahead knowing all the trouble was a small price to pay for such a prize. So I got out there like a statue, and I waited for a ride. Despite the bleak conditions and conditioning, I got a ride from the mechanic on the way to work. A large herd of folks seemed to be commuting and work at the same time to the valley below. Once out on the mountains, we were out of the fog. Above, a blue sky with a poop smear of pollution, and before us the rush and crush, which was even more daunting than all that came before. He dropped me off at a massive artery of roads that loomed over me like an etch-a-sketch briar patch, and each road was a thorn in my side. I did not know folks were made for this. Luckily, the Las Vegas interstate had primed me for this overwhelming automation of automatons and automobiles. If one has been on one industrial 8-lane highway, one has been on them all. Still, I felt quite small there next to the nitro-caffeinated and the clueless commuters. I just had to keep walking, Hermes winging it. Keep looking for a sign from the traffic gods and stick my neck out with my thumb, mostly undaunted, feeling my love was bigger than this whole goddamn mess. To me, those that picked up hitchhikers were usually the realists, the soft and aware with the software. But there was no flower power here, just pesticides and insecticides. I walked all day. Got so hungry I ate the chocolate panties and was sorely disappointed that they tasted like plastic shit. Yuckity yuck and the muckety muck. Who the fuck would eat these? Except someone starving, which was me. I got pretty thirsty from the endless walking down the foreign roads that I had to take a break to knock on doors and ask for water. Mostly no one answered, just peered out their windows incredulously, like I was the big bad wolf. Most were at work to maintain ridiculous routines. The ones that were bold enough to open the doors said a firm and haughty "No" before closing the door in my face. I finally just went to someone's lawn and turned on the hose and drank from it like a dog, feeling lost in suburbia. Everyone was scared of each other here for good reason, hiding their whole lives from each other, like most folks everywhere, because folks were scary and selfish. At some pointless point, a Christian Samaritan stopped and gave me a bag of supplies. He had a cushy job of giving a bag of junk food and fittingly toothbrushes to the homeless. I took it. I asked for a ride. He said, "No." And then I had to listen to his boring spiel about Jesus and all his so-called love, after which he drove off in his air-conditioned ride, and I stayed on the side of the road bereft. I called Vanessa some more, but the phone was disconnected now. What had happened? Last time we had talked, she told me to hurry. I said I would, but there I was, lost in San Bernardino. I finally managed to take a city bus in the right direction and even got a ride for a few miles to the obscure little town she was raised in. A couple hours before sunset I had arrived. I lumbered on sore with my blistered feet to her house until I was there. I looked on in disbelief. I looked on intently to make sure it was the right address. It was. It was now empty except for a couple of painters. I asked them where the inhabitants were. They told me the family had moved out yesterday and they did not know where they were. I shattered like a dandelion dipped in liquid nitrogen after being hit by a sneaky tomahawk missile. I started to cry and disintegrate. It was my worst fears manifest. If only I had made it one day earlier. I walked away aimless. Leonardo da Vinci cadaver dissected. I soon found the phone nearby and called Needles. Somehow my brother was there. Sobbing uncontrollably, I told him my blubbering sob story. He simply told me not to worry, that it would be okay. Would it? I bemoaned. It will, he insisted. But he did not really know. Then he was over helping me get over it and became blasé about my malaise, perhaps because he would never be in love, whereas I would spend my youth falling uncontrollably. I hung up crying still, feeling a deep throbbing sunken treasure chest pain in my chest. After a good half an hour, I dried off my tears, got off the sidewalk and walked to the road, where I kept obsessively overthinking it in the most unproductive ways. I would never see or hear her again. It was not like we were betrothed or anything, but I thought she could be the one, as with every girl that I kiss and kiss me back. Maybe it was not all that much the girls, but the feeling, the idea of love, the biochemical drunk reaction they nuclear reacted. I got a ride back into the sprawling metropolis of San Bernardino by a nice Mexican father and mother with their 3 daughters. They asked me where I was coming from and going to. I told them briefly my crappy sappy telenovela tale, and they commiserated with me. They dropped me off in the shopping cart heart of darkness, and it swallowed me up. Can't help falling in love with you. One hot fall night, a few of us found ourselves at a mad chill party at Kenny's, who was the mayor's son. Roger and Mike R. were there, but I did not know the others. Pale-skinned boys played hardcore gangster rap, which was mostly about darker folks calling each other niggers and selling out their communities to hard medicines and violence. Straight up modern slave master mentality ditties. They had their own preppy scene, but more importantly for us, they had all kinds of deer beards and slicker liquors. I had to admit it was a rad pad lad had, thanks to Dad. What I liked most was all its fluorescent yellow street signs, reading Dead End, Slippery when Wet, ICY, Dip, and Falling Rocks. It was a total sausage fest until a couple cuties showed up. One was Angela, who's 21 and kinda had a reputation for being a total slut. She introduced Vanessa as a visitor, a friend's friend she had been showing around, which was a simple thing to do because there was nothing to show. I'm sure we all fell in love with that brown-skinned visitor. She was just 17, some sort of ghetto fabulous beauty queen, if you know what I mean. A Mexican goddess from the Aztec kingdoms of long ago, presently incarnated into a deliciously warm milk chocolate body. She did not belong here. She belonged immortalized, candy emblazoned on a pimped-out lowrider's hood in some gangland hood. But here she was in all her fresh flesh. I was totally smitten, wanting to body lick that kitten. But who was I kidding? I had a better shot at shitting gold bricks than hitting that slick. The cool beer warmed me up to her and act cool. She seemed to like me too, and my tan skin, my silly style, my dopey smile. We were soon nestling, caressing, twittering into each other's ear affectionately. Some cats are cool like that. I had never ever been so close to a girl, let alone softly touching one. It was biochemical, biological, and illogical heaven of bodily delights. Boy, that was quick, Angela laughed as she got up and stared at us. Let's go, Vanessa. I gotta meet my other girls at Trish. You can bring them, she said as she pointed at me. So I jumped in. No matter where we ended up, it would be a relatively short walk home. We snuggled in the back, smuggling love through the cracks. Screaming on a cassette was Alanis Morissette, the mad raving bitch of the moment. We sang along as Alanis belted out her stereo hit album, You Oughta Know. We bonded over that as our chauffeur drove us around and round in a boxy and foxy way. Eventually, she parked it outside of Trish's trashy duplex, and we stayed in the car to drive each other sensually crazy. Vroom, vroom, witches and brooms, flowers in bloom. I was barely 16, and to me, at 17, she was an older woman. It was so wild. She said she lived in San Bernardino, and she had been through a bunch of sad shit. Her last 30-year-old boyfriend was a ruthless Mexican gangster that beat her and made her do all kinds of weird things. I was incredulous. How could any thug abuse such a beauty? What kind of unkind world was this? I also confided to her about my shitty past. Our suffering brought us closer, like it always does, because misery loves empathy. We were beside ourselves with tenderness. What a joy to not be alone anymore, at least for the night. Angela emerged with a couple others who squeezed in and rode along. Another car followed, and we went up to the river because there was nowhere else to go. Except for a lone street light, it was mostly dark at the park, but we had fun because we had intoxicants. Someone climbed to the top of the streetlight, the guys pissed in the river, a car did donuts in the parking lot. Mostly me and her held each other like we had never really been held. We decided to walk on back all just by ourselves. It was a few miles, but we instinctively knew we had to make the best of our only night because she was only here for tonight like some fairy tale, and then she would be whisked away back to her Quentin Tarantino Les Miserables life. We whispered about everything on the way back to the garage, away from the loud crowd. It was a starlit walk, and it seemed like we had all the time in the world to share secrets, hold hands, kiss gratefully, hungrily, sumptuously, as her full lips overflowed into mine. We stopped at the town's postcard picture wooden stage carriage that decorated the center of the town along the main street called Main Street. We got inside and made out for a while. I never known anyone so carnally, and I wondered why everyone who had a lover was not doing this constantly. She was the kindest addiction ever. I desperately tried to lick, swallow every part of her like I was starving, because all we had was tonight. She was pliant, yielding to my every fumbling touch, falling into each other's bumbling kisses, because all we wanted was this. Half an hour later we were back at the garage, where the party had just begun again, it seemed. The regulars were there, and were surprised to see I had a girl in tow. Angela was also there, waiting for us like Cinderella's clock, telling us our pumpkin butt night was soon to be over. We hung out, wrapped up around each other, not really engaging with the rest. We drank some more, but then slowly everyone passed out or left, one by one, two by two, by the way. Angela was the last one left, and finally left us around 3 with a sexy, lip-biting wink. She said she'd be back in the morning to pick Vanessa up, to take her back home to San Bernardino. We were still more than awake in our private world, bathed in invigorating, raging hormones and the dopest dopamines. Never had I known such a sweet high. Vanessa and I went for one last tipsy walk. As we walked past the construction site, I suggested we steal some concrete to bring back. She was down. I got down and she helped me heave the 80 pounds. But we kept dropping it, and it kept making clouds of fine ash that made us gray and dusty. We kept laughing, looking more and more like ghosts each time. We persevered and eventually got to the lab, where the party had started anew, when Natasha, Ian, and Mike D showed up out of God knows where, and we started molding the concrete like Play-Doh into lumpy mushrooms and droopy pot leaves. This night was too much. It was everything. It was perhaps all we had, and suddenly it was not enough. Like most women, she was too much woman for my inexperienced mind, but not my body. We went to the couch in the living room to canoodle some more, but I did not know where to go from there. We had worn out second base, but I did not know how to maneuver onto third. She must have been gushing wet, ready for the stoner boner of a lifetime, but I just kept kissing and making out. I managed to clumsily swiggle my hands up to her breast as we wiggle-giggled, and that was the first time a woman writhed beneath me in pleasure. It felt as I felt her up with my hands that my hands were made for cupping and tantalizing and tweaking breasts. It was like our bodies had a language of their own, like lips and tongues could speak in more than words, but I was far from fluent. I got my first hickey and I proceeded, like some vacuum-cleaning vampire, to give her a dozen of them. As her thighs pulsated beneath me, she said sweetly, "We could do more." But like a doofus, I said, "No, this is fine." Then our amorous giggling and moaning woke up Brenda's little kids, and they came up to us to see what we were doing. I had to shoo-shoo train them away like a couple of dogs. We laughed in each other's arms, exhausted, and proceeded to grope and fondle each other some more. All too happy to fondue each other. As the sun came up, we fell asleep, exhausted from kissing and dry humping. Just as soon as we were asleep, Angela was there, banging on the door, amazingly, rushing in, bitchily chipper as ever, seeming not to have slept, insisting Vanessa had to go pronto. Vanessa hastily wrote down her grandmother's number, and I said I would call and come for her, that I loved her. It must have been quite a scene for Angela to have watched, undoubtedly and justifiably cynical. She poked fun at the archipelago of marks we left on each other's necks, and then ferried her away like some Jezebel fairy godmother. Just like that, they were gone. I looked on lazily as the dust bunnies trailed behind the car, barely awake in their hazy wake. I went back to sleep, back to dreaming about Vanessa, about us, about true love. Unchained Melody. I woke a few hours later feeling like it was a dream. What an MDMA love was. Oxytocin and dopamines were the thing for me. Fuck everything else. Except psychedelics, which gave me the sweetest feelings and thoughts. But if I had to choose, I would easily choose her. Love is what I imagined heroin was like. I would lie, steal, and shield for that high, like so many had. Overnight I became another depraved junkie needing another fix. This love had taken all the pain I ever had away, until she went away. And that was something, because my life had been a shit show, and I had shit to show for it. I reached in my pocket and found salvation in her phone number. It was my ticket to paradise. I was beyond puppy happy. I had found my true love. That was not as hard as I thought it would be. I had seen it in so many movies. I was to be her Prince Charming, her knight in shining armor, and she was my damsel in distress. I would swoop in and save her. Then she would swoon. I imagined how soon I would sweep her off her feet. I met the gang in the garage and told them about my radical change of heart, about the revolution therein, how love was true, and I had found it. It felt like love had set me on fire, and through some carnal alchemy my meaty heart became pure gold. They were skeptically wry about it, but overall pretty good-natured, happy I got some, and also teasing me about my many wicked hickeys, which I displayed like badges of honor. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I must leave at once and not hesitate. It was sheer cheddar-shredding madness, like real love always is. Not that it was real to her, or realistic, but it was real to me. It would be Halloween in a couple days, and I thought I could be her Romeo. As Shakespeare wrote, "Did my heart love till now? Forswear it, sight, for I ne'er saw a truer beauty till this night." Far as I knew, it did not get more romantic than that for a young love. At heart, I was a chivalrous dude, and I wanted to make her life magical and kind. Undeterred and unfettered by robust reality, I vowed to my friends that I would find a way. I would make my way. It was not long before I was on my way, on the highway. All I had to do was call her and get the address. Unfortunately, it was not that easy for me to get the change for a long-distance call. In fact, it was a lot of work to get some quarters. It took a few hours to scrounge up a couple bucks. The usual couches had been gleaned and picked clean long ago. I finally asked Brenda, telling her it was for love, and she was kind enough to indulge. She was also giddy as fuck that I was getting some. Once I had the change, I ran to the nearest payphone a few blocks away. I talked to her grandmother, who told me she was not home yet, so I waited all day and called back in the evening after having hustled up some more quarters from under soda machines and drive-through window drop-ins. Around sunset I called again. Her grandmother picked up, then passed the phone to her. She reaffirmed our tireless love for each other. I told her I was coming soon, leaving today. She gave me directions and said to hurry, that she was waiting. It was all too sweet and true. There was so much hope. Too much. By noon the next day I was on the road. I had thumbed it a few times before, but this was the first time, but not the last, for chasing love. I waited on the wings of love all day for a ride. Heart aflutter, feeling how great it would be to arrive so soon. For many patient hours I stood and waited for the folks to chariot me to her. After a few hours it started to rain. What the fuck, it rarely rains here. A sign from heaven. Perhaps the gods were crying for my naivete. I left after 6 long hours when it was dangerously dark and started heavily raining, which put the kibosh on my plans. I was soaking wet when I found everyone back at the garage. Everyone was glad Romeo had returned from his doomed quest, and we celebrated like always, riding our aluminum rocket ships to the moon, fueled by sheep grain, alcohol, and malt liquors. It was all pie in the sky, and we just loved to get high, because we were lower forms of lowlifes experimenting with out-of-this-world satellite feelings, and this seemed to be all that worked. I could not get into the usual six-pack catharsis that night. Sure, I drank, but it did not slow down my racing mind, which raced towards her, going the distance. I felt broken, and she was the only fix. I just thought of her with the utmost, like devout preachers thought about their Holy Ghost. Angela made a guest appearance at our humble hangout and informed me that when she dropped her off the day before with her cousins, that she could not stop talking about me. Damn straight, I thought. For the 18th time that day I vowed to myself and the others as my witnesses that I would go to her. But first another beer, another song, another bong. Fire, water, burn. The next day was Halloween Eve, better known to us as Dia de los Muertos, Devil's Night. We had some ghosts who had been ghosted by transparent, not all apparent parents. Some skeletons in the closet with bloody hearts banging on rib cages, while we Roman Colosseum battled our own feelings to death. We were jaded, bit faded, degraded, renegades, but ready to pirate, raid, parade it. Roger decided it was a good day to smoke his dad's ashes. Some of us partook a deli toke, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, cough to cough. All we were was dust in the wind. Even Brenda, who had not smoked in a decade because it probably exacerbated her manic manias, took a lungful of what was left of her ex-husband. It was a simple trailer trash ritual, as spiritual as anything else, for it was not what was said or done, but the undergirding intentions and devotions. Inhaling the past, exhaling the moment to live in a loving future. It made many doomsday prepping contemplative, as we marinated in the clouds of smoke and silence emanating radiantly. It was a fitting start to an unruly day. We had all seen The Crow with Bruce Lee's son Brandon and were fixated by the fiery anarchy of it, because we were extremely impressionable and combustible, little Tasmanian devils of rebellion, ready to be pure hellions. We were the clockwork orange, red, black, and purple, rearranging pumpkins, smashing bumpkins, lava pumping, bass thumping, looking for something to dynamite cartoon, to firework and rework and berserk. The beehive mentality was abuzz, and we decided to be pyromaniacs for the blazing holy days. Ian especially wanted to burn some shit down like a Beavis and Butthead skit. We wanted the town to burn to the ground. Luckily, it was just a television-induced phase, and we would soon outgrow it. Until then, all hell broke loose as Ian kept spitting out, "Fire! Fire!" like Butthead. So we left the garage searching for felonious mayhem. It was a riot as I followed Natasha and Ian around with a couple bottles of rubbing alcohol, looking for a church or a noble institution to desecrate and incinerate. We ended up behind the Girl Scout office and tried to burn it down with a little bit of trash and rubbing alcohol. Clearly the rain had made things pretty damp. Fail. Try as we might, it really did not want to start. Fortunately, we were amateurs. We walked back defeated, but secretly relieved too, I suspect. On the way back, we found Wade, Roger, Darlene, Mike R., and Jerry down the alleyway. The whole town was already asleep, and it was barely 10. We made some caterwauling racket, talked rubbish, kicked over some trash cans. Then we came upon an abandoned Cactus Rose hotel, where in my younger days I had stayed with my mother and brother when we first landed here about 5 years ago, and got deserted. Someone had the breakthrough idea to break in, so we do, because it sounded like a smashing good time. I kept a lookout while the glass was broken and the windows opened. Then, after they rummaged in there for a minute, Darlene lit the place on fire. They soon started to tumble out as the smoke started to spill over and waterfall upwards into a starfire ocean. That got us pumped. We fled the scene of that misadventure, running for our lives, laughing, completely thrilled. Fire! Fire! This plyboard and cardboard town was made of burn like all the rest. There was something very empowering about being a pyromaniac. We hauled ass as the hellish and heartwarming glow ascended behind us, and we became legends for an airy, fire-breathing fairy moment. We became small-town gods, unleashing the beast for a blazing feast. We were the innocent until proven guilty teenagers terrorizing small-town USA, and it was another offering to the Mount Olympus fire. It took a while for someone to rotary dial it in, our montages rotisserie stylings. Not until we opened some beers back at the garage did we hear the cop sirens, soon followed by the fire trucks with their watery hydras unspooling from street hydrants. It was only like 5 blocks away. We sat on a concrete wall that ran along the side of the garage, dividing the gleeful sinners and wannabe saints. We looked up in wonder as the horizon turned burnt orange and then bruised purples. Holy fuck. We had done it. Mission accomplished with my reprobate accomplices. We had got away with another divine crime, doing our time, our way, in death sentence of a world. We sat on the concrete wall, cheering on the fire, watching the smoke rise, relishing it. I goose-spoofed Steve Urkel's, raising my pants and whining his famous catchphrase, "Ew, did I do that?" It was intoxicating, that feeling of destructive power. We also, all together, sang a cappella triumphantly, "The roof, The roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let the motherfucker burn. Burn, motherfucker, burn. We celebrate the whole night and smoked another shitty joint and big gulp more piss water beer. 16. Halloween arrived and I had decided to stay one more day. I was revitalized, homecoming king, cheerleading pumped by the last couple days. I gathered my strength for another fun night, and the next day I would hitch out to my lover. To celebrate the second coolest day of the year, I got a pair of Groucho Marx glasses with a big mustache and bulging nose for a couple bucks. The gang assembled over at the Marshmallows place, which was on a popular Candyland route for the kids. Not many of the squad dressed up because it was beneath them this year, unlike the years before. It was free candy, and I myself was still a kid in most ways and would be for many years. Woohoo! After some time, we left the house and went all over, marauding with different bands of pirates and vampires. At one point, Natasha, who was dressed like a witch, suggested I steal someone's candy. It was a bad idea, but it sounded good at the time, so I ran across the street and Yankee janked and ganked some pudgy Michelangelo Ninja Turtles candy. Michelangelo cried like a total rad rover ran over a puppy. It made me feel totally guilty. Still, I ran back with my booty, laughing. We all coalesced more or less back at the grand mess of the garage to rage it some more. It was a night to forget, because I went to sleep early, getting ready to ride out in the morning with Angela, who said she would give me a ride early to Barstow, which was halfway there, to the one and only one. Going the distance. Before I left the next morning, Brenda gave me a 5-spot and a pair of chocolate panties. She explained in her usual winger humdinger fashion that she would not be using the special panties any time soon because her man Dan had ran. Dan was the man she had woodpeckered after she had pickpocketed him from the Agape house next door. She further explained casually that he left because he found out that Mike R. had been puncturing her canoodle noodle condoms with needles. I nodded, not quite sure what to make of it. Like most of her shifty makeshift explanations, it was a head-scratcher and made me wonder what the actual fuck. I started to suspect that she might be a compulsive liar and a sexomaniac super freak. In time, I would learn paranoid schizophrenic folks lived a far more colorful life than most, filled with all kinds of whack intrigue and doughy conspiracies. If I may speculate like an evolutionary psychologist, I suspect that her survival strategy involved getting knocked up by random dudes, and, so far, had been working. How else was a total nut job going to keep anyone around without busting a nut or a few? Nature's a clever, squirrely bitch. On the way to Angela's, I walked past where me and Vanessa had spilt the cement a few nights back, and I smiled at how the rain had made it into concrete. In our short time, me and Vanessa had left our mark, and it would be there for years, far longer than me. I got in Angela's car with her mom and the cat, which kept having a conniption as it became the hysterical star in its own claustrophobic nightmare. We drove west, the sun and wind at our backs, timeless ghost towns and dude ranches popping up left and right in slow motion, while right in front of us I could feel her waiting. I had not been able to contact her in the last couple of days, but scribbled on a scrap of paper I had her address and all the hope in the world. I stayed the night with Angela in Barstow. She even invited me to her bed. Was it some sort of modest hostess with the hostess with the mostess? She said it was innocent, but at first I was incredulous and felt it could be some sort of boozy floozy trying to tempt me. Don't worry, I won't molest you, she huffed, partly amused but also exasperated by my childishness. So I slept next to a full-grown woman, keeping my thoughts in penis chaste, thinking of owning my lovely and how close I was. I debated if I should present her with the chocolate panties. Until the time came, I left it as an option if we chanced upon that groovy mood, because chocolate made everything better. Ain't no mountain high enough. Angela had not sullied my virgin skin. Better yet, she gave me a book the next day as I hit the road. I read it, wanting to see what bestsellers were all about, so soon I could publish my own and become the youngest novelist with a bestseller ever. No one had ever given me a book, and it would have been quite a treat if it was worth the paper it was printed on. It was morbidly contrived, as it dashed from one ghastly and freaky thing to another like some child had wrote it. I surmise it did not take much imagination or talent to be a bestseller, which I found encouraging and worrying at the same time. Angela was cool enough to drop me off at a good spot on the edge of town. I remembered the spot instantly. It was a familiar spot where I used to hang out with my mom and her Cuban boyfriend Santos when we used to dumpster dive for a 30-mile radius when we lived in these parts years ago. It was the Flying J truck stop, and we would sometimes stop in and get soft-served ice cream, which was dipped in a special chocolate syrup which instantly hardened around the soft cream, which I loved as a little kid. There was something magical about watching this chocolate instantly harden and mold around the swirls. Lo and behold, as I walked on over the on-ramp, there was already an old mullis hitching, and he had a BB gun under his coat for protection. It was odd, but he was an oddball, something left over from the 30s train hoppers and hobos. He mumbled that there was plenty of good burgers in the McDonald's trash. He gave me one. I ate it, because they were chock full of preservatives, and I was all about some self-preservation. I decided to spend what little money I had on some ice cream, because life was short, and it might be a while. I was finally on my own, but maybe it was a tad premature for a lad so immature. I came back and watched him get a ride from a mother with a toddler and an infant, which made it look easy, because I had erroneously assumed from his appearance that he would never get a ride. It would never be easy. Most of it was luck. I stood there for hours with my JanSport school backpack and a huge sleeping bag which was losing its stuffing. I just crooked lips smiled at strangers as they looked down on this brown-skinned kid languishing on the grimy fringe of the asphalt. Apparently almost no one cared about anyone here, not even a vulnerable teen, especially not the phony pious preachers and their showroom zealous congregation. Careless folks imperviously sipped past me, seemingly glad to see me wasting away in vain. This was peak Schadenfreude for some of my anxious and fear-ridden countrymen. The good folks laser-grazed by, leaving a child to get raped or killed. This was their chance, an easy win, an opportunity to actually help someone. But they rather rat race home and stuff their fat faces. Incredibly, they were terrified of a child with nothing, asking for very little, practically nothing. All they had to do was pull over for a few seconds, let me jump in, then pull over again and let me jump out where our paths diverge. But that was too much of a burden for everyone. Everyone had needed help at some time in their life, but now that they got a chance to pay it forward, they kept the change and decided I was not worth it, that their time was too valuable and I was apparently worthless. If you want a surefire way to lose faith in humanity, bumming it and thumbing it was it. Folks spoke of angels and karma and fellowship of man, but it was all such a rookie pile of cookie dough dookie. You can get ugly lookies from heartless cookies. I got mean stares from those completely unaware. Try it when you got a second to spare. I was left to die by the most petty of folks, my fellow patriots who only believed in helping themselves and faking it for a second coming that never came. It was like they wanted me to die here. Even those that had in recent times suffered great injustices, like the Jews and the descendants of slaves, did not care. In fact, the minorities cared even less. At least some poor Christians who really believed in being rewarded in afterlife would pick me up to humble boast about it. Amidst it all, I had little choice but to smile, as everyone missed out. I just grinned desperately at all the indecent exposure, faithfully waiting for the rarest of sight and the fairest of lights, a decent human being. San Bernardino was further than I had once thought. Fortunately, I was 2/3 of the way there, thanks to that sweet Madonna horror complex woman. Everything looked so easy on a big map a couple days ago, with a fresh ho-ho-hope. It was only a Byzantine 70 miles away to the outskirts of where she lived, but at this rate, it would take many more days. Eventually I got a ride halfway to Bakersfield. The dude drove a ratty van and told me I was crazy. I Cheshire Cat smiled at him and told him with gusto that I was crazy in love. Aside from rainbow gatherings, following my heart/boner would become one of the predominant themes of my life. I had nothing to do for over a decade but follow girls all around the living large country, trying to replace the acceptance and security I never got from my mother. He left me at an AM/PM gas station with a couple handfuls of pocket change he had in his cup holder. I ate some hot dogs and candy bars, then I went back on the busy road. I waited until the sun set. Nothing. Instead, it got cold real quick, and I foraged in the ruins of another ecosystem for warmth. I eventually went back to the gas station in the dark and asked some folks for a ride, but not many came, and all ignored me or said they were going the other way. I called Vanessa's house for the dozenth time that day, but no one would answer. I went to sleep on a hill, on a mountain, in a desert, all alone, thinking of her, how I would be there soon, which warmed my heart more than anything could. But I still froze as I dozed into nothing. In Bloom. I woke early, unable to sleep anymore, because it was too cold without a jacket and only a t-shirt. I just had to get my corny, syrupy blood moving. There was a thick fog that made it hard to see beyond just a few yards. I soon ducked into the gas station for warmth. I used the bathroom and lingered on at the hot hand dryer for a few minutes. I bought the cheapest things there, Little Debbie snacks, which would become a staple of my unstable diet for years to come. Then I double-checked the map by the register as a couple employees glared at me. The closer I got, the more confusing it got. What awaited me seemed to be a scattered spaghetti platter full of rectangle angle roads, a slew of rigid octopi ready to entangle me in concrete tentacles. I closed the map with a big boxy scribble of mazes, and I got ready to hard scrabble. I had to mosey on without a doubt. I forged ahead knowing all the trouble was a small price to pay for such a prize. So I got out there like a statue, and I waited for a ride. Despite the bleak conditions and conditioning, I got a ride from the mechanic on the way to work. A large herd of folks seemed to be commuting and work at the same time to the valley below. Once out on the mountains, we were out of the fog. Above, a blue sky with a poop smear of pollution, and before us the rush and crush, which was even more daunting than all that came before. He dropped me off at a massive artery of roads that loomed over me like an etch-a-sketch briar patch, and each road was a thorn in my side. I did not know folks were made for this. Luckily, the Las Vegas interstate had primed me for this overwhelming automation of automatons and automobiles. If one has been on one industrial 8-lane highway, one has been on them all. Still, I felt quite small there next to the nitro-caffeinated and the clueless commuters. I just had to keep walking, Hermes winging it. Keep looking for a sign from the traffic gods and stick my neck out with my thumb, mostly undaunted, feeling my love was bigger than this whole goddamn mess. To me, those that picked up hitchhikers were usually the realists, the soft and aware with the software. But there was no flower power here, just pesticides and insecticides. I walked all day. Got so hungry I ate the chocolate panties and was sorely disappointed that they tasted like plastic shit. Yuckity yuck and the muckety muck. Who the fuck would eat these? Except someone starving, which was me. I got pretty thirsty from the endless walking down the foreign roads that I had to take a break to knock on doors and ask for water. Mostly no one answered, just peered out their windows incredulously like I was the big bad wolf. Most were at work to maintain ridiculous routines. The ones that were bold enough to open the doors said a firm and haughty "no" before closing the door in my face. I finally just went to someone's lawn and turned on the hose and drank from it like a dog, feeling lost in suburbia. Everyone was scared of each other here for good reason, hiding their whole lives from each other, like most folks everywhere, because folks were scary and selfish. At some pointless point, a Christian Samaritan stopped and gave me a bag of supplies. He had a cushy job of giving a bag of junk food and fittingly toothbrushes to the homeless. I took it. I asked for a ride. He said, "No." And then I had to listen to his boring spiel about Jesus and all his so-called love, after which he drove off in his air-conditioned ride, and I stayed on the side of the road bereft. I called Vanessa some more, but the phone was disconnected now. What had happened? Last time we had talked, she told me to hurry. I said I would, but there I was, lost in San Bernardino. I finally managed to take a city bus in the right direction and even got a ride for a few miles to the obscure little town she was raised in. A couple hours before sunset I had arrived. I lumbered on sore with my blistered feet to her house until I was there. I looked on in disbelief. I looked on intently to make sure it was the right address. It was. It was now empty except for a couple of painters. I asked them where the inhabitants were. They told me the family had moved out yesterday and they did not know where they were. I shattered like a dandelion dipped in liquid nitrogen after being hit by a sneaky tomahawk missile. I started to cry and disintegrate. It was my worst fears manifest. If only I had made it one day earlier. I walked away aimless. Leonardo da Vinci cadaver dissected. I soon found the phone nearby and called Needles. Somehow my brother was there. Sobbing uncontrollably, I told him my blubbering sob story. He simply told me not to worry, that it'll be okay. Would it? I bemoaned. It will, he insisted. But he did not really know. Then he was over helping me get over it and became blasé about my malaise, perhaps because he would never be in love, whereas I would spend my youth falling uncontrollably. I hung up crying still, feeling a deep throbbing sunken treasure chest pain in my chest. After a good half an hour, I dried off my tears, got off the sidewalk and walked to the road, where I kept obsessively overthinking it in the most unproductive ways. I would never see or hear her again. It was not like we were betrothed or anything, but I thought she could be the one, as with every girl that I kiss and kiss me back. Maybe it was not all that much the girls, but the feeling, the idea of love, the biochemical drunk reaction they nuclear reacted. I got a ride back into the sprawling metropolis of San Bernardino by a nice Mexican father and mother with their 3 daughters. They asked me where I was coming from and going to. I told them briefly of my crappy sappy telenovela tale, and they commiserated with me. They dropped me off in the shopping cart heart of darkness, and it swallowed me up. Walk on the wild side. Again, I awoke next to the highway and kept MC Etcher walking around that Gordian knot, seemingly getting nowhere, waiting for my ride for over a decade. A skinny black guy with a thin mustache gives me a ride and quickly tries to take me for a ride. The first couple of minutes he was pretty nice, asking me where I was going, how old I was, even saying he might be able to get me a Grey Dog bus ticket. I thought, who would not want a free ticket? Then he summarily explained his and in turn the world's philosophy of how one does not get something for nothing, and then added airily as could be, "If you do me a favor, I'll do you one, kid. If you help me, I'll take you to the bus station and get you a ticket anywhere." I laughed in his face because this was not the movie Midnight Cowboy. I had to cut the shit, hence I cut to the chase. Dude. I'm more than good on the side of the road. I'm not some prostitute. That was when his creepy smile shriveled into a tight, thin line, and he cynically says, "Not yet. The world changes, folks." The heartbreaking implication was that it would change me, like it had changed him and all the older folks around me. I did not want to be bought so easily, treated like a product on a bargain shelf. But I was not old or broken yet, and I would be damned if I let anyone keep me down more than the world already had. The funeral parlor gods knew I'd rather be dead as a doornail than loafing around some packaged bread, rubbish-fed living dead. I was more than happy to get out of the ratty car of Mr. Miser Creepster. As the bad daddy drove away, I pondered how the world changed us in a myriad of ways, to be old, cunning pervs who preyed on the defenseless young. I would rather walk and And I did, and I told myself the world would not change me into something I was not. Not me. My legs, my calves, feet and toes ached, all beat up, but I kept on going, beat by beat. There was no escaping it. I was at rock bottom, between two mountain peaks. It was rock hard rock, as heavy metal cars blew and flew by. All I could feel was a dark, bruised, blue feeling that I had just literally lost the love of my life. So my logic broke down and started to pray to the blue ball busting blockbuster gods. I crackhead pleaded, begged for some chance that I would find her again. I had suffered greatly, but I had never known this torture. Never had I had someone who loved me. Despite my possibly fatal wounds, deep down in my Hollywood box office smashing Oscar winning heart, I still titanium felt I would find true love one day. All I had was love to give, and someone would just give it back to back one day. Give it from the wiggly piggly slopping carts to obsolete bionic parts. Until then, I had to give it all up and return, as the heart fire turned to heartburn. What a blaze I was as I walked glazed. I had never felt this love fever. I was a holy smoking believer, still sifting through the sifting ashes of my Randy Candy Crush crash. I walked until the cops stopped me in the afternoon traffic. I had no identification, so I gave him my brother's name, who had just turned 18 in September. He soon let me go and told me it was illegal to hitch. No shit. I shrugged and looked away, not knowing another way. Should I be train hopping? That was even more illegal and dangerous. I was not a fan and thought as he drove away, fuck the police anyhow and their greasy chorizo ways. Afterward I got a ride from a crusty redneck that was a total devotee of the hoochie, who lived to pooch, smoosh, mush, and tush the cushy cushy. I would never meet a man who slobbered about it so reverently. I was all heartbroken, and he was just telling me all these overrated, X-rated scenarios, how vagina always bounces back no matter what, like a rubber band. He kept on with his bacon grease trailer spark poetry about going down on juicy fruit, about gushing geysers, overflowing volcanoes, any time of the month. Just let him at it. A bona fide, horny hot dog. Nothing but a hound dog, and womankind were all playboy bunnies he wanted to full flavor savor and devour. Just rear it on up, and he would tear it up. Sadly, he did not give too many penis pump pointers about how to love a woman besides sex, albeit that was all some wanted. I got dropped off in the foothills and left the big bland lands behind me. I waited at a good enough spot, relieved to be somewhere chill and deserted. This desert solitude was a shea and eucalyptus salve to my shafted and fevered soul. Although Larry David might disagree, there was a huge possibility I was on the Asperger's spectrum, hence easily overwhelmed at time. Regardless, I felt like I could finally breathe a little easier without all the rat race and pollution. I was a small-town bubble boy at heart. Suddenly, a slick yellow sports car screeched to a stop on the on-ramp I was at. I started ambling towards it. Then someone leaned out the window and threw a beer bottle, which landed close to my feet. They peeled out like a split banana. I heard kids were squealing like supervillains as they revved furiously up on the on-ramp and onto the highway. I shrugged. That was a first for me. It was bewildering. Sheesh, what a world. I still had much to learn about America and its strange fruit ways. Like, what compelled rich folks to do that to someone clearly less fortunate? Next, I got a ride from a human transformer, clearly a tender transgender, a drag queen way past her prime. This rare being spoke in a husky female voice, perhaps having run out of money to smooth it out with hormones. I told the funky unicorn where I was coming from and where I was going. I got some sympathy, then dropped outside of Barstow with a 22-ounce Budweiser he had bought for me. He said it would keep us warm on another cold, lonely night. It was cold comfort, the only comfort most had. I drank it and went to sleep in the frigid bushes with the rattlers and the cactus. As I continental drifter drift to sleep, I had lifted WWF weight-lifting visions of my sunflower, her brilliant eyes now mythical. That was some sort of sensual healing we gave each other. Now it was all gone. What a fucking tease it all was. The gods must be crazy. Undeterred, though, I still felt like an untethered, hopeless romantic. I was so dehydrated, thus I dreamt of her lips, then of being stranded on an iceberg because it was cold as the witch's teeth. Sweet surrender. I shivered awake into the foggy dawn, hungover and groggy from a restless night. As I got to my feet, I looked around the dim glow and saw a frozen world. The sleeping bag was covered in ice. The whole universe was iced over. Even the few stars remaining above were teeny snowflakes. I had to start moving or turn into a popsicle. I took a deep, frosting snowman breath and prepared to shiver and wait some more. I could scarcely feel my legs and arms. I threw the useless and trash sleeping bag away, then started walking on the highway at first light. Some nice proto-hipster picked me up. He asked me if I liked Elvis Costello. I told him I had only heard of Elvis Presley. He played some Costello and dropped me off in Barstow, which was still 140 miles of empty desert away from my destination, but at least it was a simple straight shot with only a few outposts of humanity lining it. This was quite a marathon, taking far longer than ever to get back again. It looked so easy a few days ago, but the hardest part still waited, which was coming back alone. I walked a couple hours to the end of town, knowing full well it was always easier to get a ride on the outskirts of town where folks were going more than a few inner-city miles. I thought about stopping by Angela's, but decided to just make it back. I got a ride to some gas station betwixt here and there in the middle of nowhere. I could not find water anywhere. I asked the attendant and he said, "There's not any, but we sell it." I told him I had no money. He next recommended, "Don't drink the tap water in the bathroom because it's not suitable for drinking." I was lifestyles of the broken excelling. I stomped out thirsty and miffed that folks do that with water. I fortunately got one last forgettable ride home to the sweet garage. It was dusk and no one was there. I walked in, threw my small pack down. It was nice to have it to myself, to relax after that doomed expedition of true love. I crawled over to my corner and soon passed out defeated and depressed. Wandering Stars. I found my brother the next day, and it was high time and high times again. It was comforting because I missed him sorely. Secretly I needed him, but since he did not need me, I kept it to myself. He regaled us with tales of his great search for the great church, about finding it, but not making the cut as a monk there. Instead of adopting them into their special select sect of what I imagined to be an international pedophile sex ring, they gave him another book of crazy miracles and prophecies from the old charlatan lady. What a trip! Seemed like we were still living in biblical times, perhaps more than ever, as it toxically regurgitated gospel spread like a rapacious tumor, an unstoppable ancient snow crash virus. As quickly as he came, he left again. He was off to see the wizard in hopes that some other monastery cult they had would let him join. We wished him the best. The rest of us stayed to plot our own desperate escapes without scholarship grants or even high school diplomas. Word had it that there would be a rainbow gathering down South America way. Me, Roger, Mike, and Ian and Natasha began to cannabis and hash out our own Merry Hail Mary plan in the coming weeks. We quickly decided to leave in about a month for Peru. The fact that we didn't have money or any identification was just a mere formality that we thought we could deftly maneuver, either by sneaking in through the jungles or deserts or simply sweet-talking them. Curiously and conversely, countless Mexicans and Central Americans tried to sneak into America. It sounded like an exceptional escape plan, and it kept getting better in the coming weeks. We did not research a single thing, just took it for granted it could not be so hard. If we had, maybe we would have went to a nice beach town along the Californian coast instead. My brother made it sound like there was nothing to it and assured us it was a cakewalk getting in. What a time! We were so hopeful and felt goddamn invincible. Who let the dogs out? Fall came, and with it, it was time to skedaddle. The first thing me and Mike M did to get ready for the trip of a lifetime was to rescue our new mascot, a puppy we christened Puddles. We had saved Puddles a few weeks prior. She was also coming with us to the American land down under because who did not need a little puppy power? We had first noticed the yelping mutt hanging out of a window to be precise, painfully pinched in the crook of a half-rolled window. Poor dumb thing was probably trying to escape and got caught. It more than likely would have broke its leg and torso if we had not rushed to grab it. We were aghast. Who the fuck would leave their dog in a car like that? We declared irately that the owners were major assholes and took the matters into our own hands. Unquestionably, the crew was stoked at this little furball of added responsibility. We named her Puddles because she kept peeing everywhere. It was like our new action hero toy. We soon painted her a white coat with bright markers because we wanted her to be tie-dyed punk rocker, like us. She was cool. Maybe it was all the weed we smoked and blew in her face, like a THC cloud gods. Then, a mere week later, she got impounded. There was no question about it. We just had to break our little Snoop Dogg out of the dog pound. Puddle's jail was conveniently positioned a few hundred feet from the real jail and courthouse. Me and Mike were down for most clandestine adventure, so we went on over. We walked around the 20 by 20 fence-link cube a couple times, seeing Puddles clearly in the mix of a couple dozen other jailbirds, half of them barking. Before long, Mike kicked down the flimsy gate like a cage fighter, and we walked right in. We strolled into the cage within the cage, feeling scared and invigorated by the cool rush of adrenaline. The dog started barking even more as soon as we came in, looking fierce in the dim light. We made eye contact with our buddy, a warm and soft candle among the cold and jagged shadows. Once spotted, Mike grabbed our damsel in distress and we outlawed it the fuck out of there, laughing like maniacs while a few other dogs howled, yelped, and ran into the desert also. Eventually we found out that Puddles belonged to Liz and Craig, who were super bummed out about losing their dog. Still, we decided to keep the bitch and be crummy parents. It was not like we saw them much, and we would be out in a couple of weeks. Just had to keep her close and out of sight. The next week, Puddles got caught again. This time, I went with Norman, who was also down for illegal shenanigans, like most of us. We did the same thing. We reprimanded Puddles for being so easy to catch and cut through the desert again, back to our joint. Then, a week or so later, as we prepared to leave in a couple days, she got caught for a third time. We deliberated about leaving her, since she was so stupid, but decided to spring her out one last time since she was so cute and we were so stupid. After a couple days of letting her rot, Ian and I went this time, and we decided to set all the captives free. He went berserker on the door, and we tried to push some dogs out, but mostly they were complacent and not caring to escape into the night and freedom. In the torrent of dogs, we found Puddles and grabbed her, only to find her infested thick with ticks. Ticks one could see and feel all over like creepy braille. Then an especially ravenous dog started to nip viciously at our heels. We had to make a run for it, with a mad dog running after us until we split off and it did not know who to follow. Doggone it. On the very day we were to leave, Puddles got scooped and pounded again. Ay caramba. That animal control dude was out of control. It was like he was making commissions on each dog. He was seemingly lurking around every corner for a stray dog, or he just found the honey hole. I guess we could have kept her on a leash, but figured she would figure it out. It was the last straw. Strike one, strike two, strike three, and she was out. No runaway home run for her. We agreed without hesitation, let Puddle stay locked up again. Maybe someone would adopt her or she would be euthanized. We did not really care anymore. I figured if there was a cushy afterlife, surely all dogs go to heaven. There was no sugarcoating it. We had ruined her life. Before she met us, she had a home and a family that cared for her. Then we came along and took it all away so we can occasionally play fetch and get her high. Shit happens, and it happened to happen a lot with that mutt. There was no shame in our game. Good riddance. It was just a poop factory with no criminal aptitude. It was also possible that each time she went missing, it was on purpose, and she was running for her life. Tired of our innate inability to care for her basic needs, treating her more like a stuffed animal than a serious responsibility needing care and affection.